Hello everyone. I know you watched this video to accompany you to sleep. So if you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, don't forget to tell me where you are from and what time you watched this video. Let's jump straight into the story. Story 1. I've always been the type of person who is skeptical about ghost stories and paranormal events. I loved horror movies and thrillers, but I never truly believed that anything supernatural could occur in real life. That was until one night when I found myself reliving a nightmare I never knew would become all too real. It was a chilly autumn evening, just a few weeks before Halloween. The leaves danced through the streets, painted in shades of orange and brown, and the sun dipped beneath the horizon, leaving an eerie twilight hanging in the air. I had a simple plan: to spend the night alone in my family's old cabin in the woods, a place filled with fond memories of camping trips and storytelling. It had been years since I'd visited, but with my friends busy and my schedule finally clear, I decided a weekend retreat was just what I needed. After a long drive, I arrived at the cabin and was greeted by a familiar sight. A weathered wooden structure with an old but sturdy porch surrounded by towering pines. I stepped inside, the air thick with the smell of old cedar, nostalgia washing over me as I unpacked my things. The cabin had no electricity, but the flicker of candlelight added an air of rustic charm. I lit a fire in the stone fireplace and settled in for a cozy night, feeling content and peaceful. As the darkness settled outside, I made myself a simple dinner and then cracked open a book I had brought along. Hours passed as I lost myself in the story, the only sound being the occasional crackle of the fire. But as midnight approached, I began to feel an unsettling chill. Goosebumps prickled at my skin, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I brushed it off as paranoia. After all, I was alone in the woods with the echoes of nighttime wildlife surrounding me. I finished my book and decided to venture outside for some fresh air. As I stepped onto the porch, the moon hung low and bright in the sky, casting long shadows across the ground. However, the night was too silent, the usual chorus of crickets conspicuously absent. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves and process the odd stillness. I walked a few steps into the clearing, gazing up at the stars, when something caught my eye, a flickering light deep in the woods. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but then I saw it again, a soft, dancing glow, like a candle being carried through the trees. Curiosity piqued, I grabbed a flashlight, told myself it was just someone else out for a late-night walk, and made my way cautiously in the direction of the light. With each step, the hairs on my neck began to rise, an instinctual warning that I should turn back. But I pushed forward, intrigue overriding my better judgment. As I drew near, I noticed the light was not moving, but rather appeared to be anchored in one spot. I slowed my pace, shining my flashlight ahead, heart racing. When I finally reached the source, I found a small clearing with an old, weathered stone well, overgrown and clearly forgotten. There was a gnarled tree nearby, its branches twisted in unnatural shapes, and at the edge of the well, the flickering light emanated from what looked like a tattered black cloth, fluttering gently in the wind. It was then that I felt the temperature plummet, and a whisper of a voice, barely audible, seemed to rise from the depths of the well. For a moment, panic surged through me. I wanted to run, but something held me in place, an unseen force, as if the very air insisted I listen. The voice, barely a whisper, began to call my name, repeating it like a haunting echo that wrapped around my thoughts. Shaking, I grabbed my phone to use its flashlight, but just then, the beam flickered and died. I tried again. Nothing. I was plunged into darkness, the well's cold depths looming before me, and the voice grew louder, more insistent. Heart pounding, I stumbled back from the well, but the shadows seemed to stretch, reaching toward me like skeletal fingers. I turned to run, my instincts taking over, and as I sprinted down the path, the weight of unseen eyes followed me through the trees. Branches clawed at my arms like the grasp of desperate hands. I burst onto the porch of the cabin, slamming the door shut behind me, my breath coming in ragged gasps. It took what felt like hours for my heart rate to slow, but the chilling sensation of being watched remained. I fought sleep for a while, my mind racing through what had just happened. Finally, exhaustion overcame me, and I sank into an uneasy sleep on the couch, the fire's embers only a faint glow in the darkened room. I awoke suddenly, the night still shrouded in heavy darkness, the fire now cold. A sound pulled me from my dreams, a soft knocking at the door, gentle yet persistent. My heart raced as I lay still, panic flooding my senses. I debated my next action. Curiosity pulled me in one direction, while fear anchored me in place. The knocking continued, rhythmic and methodical, and then I heard that whisper again, softer now, but unmistakably calling my name. Against my better judgment, I crept to the door, feeling the chilling air brush over my skin as I reached for the doorknob. Just as my fingers brushed the cold metal, the knocking stopped. I hesitated, heart racing, the silence now deafening. In that moment, I thought I might just imagine it all, perhaps a figment of an overactive mind. But as I turned to walk away, I heard the whisper again, clearer than ever, echoing through the stillness. Let me in. Instantly, a wave of terror surged through me, and I backed away, realizing I couldn't shake the feeling of being trapped. The cabin no longer a sanctuary, but a prison. I grabbed my bag and hurried to the window to peer outside. My breath hung in the air as I saw the same flickering light from earlier, now closer, dancing at the edge of the clearing. Panicking, I bolted past the darkened rooms of the cabin, fumbling for the front door. Just as I unlocked it, I heard frantically rattling behind me, the sounds of something moving swiftly inside. Before I could turn, the door swung open into the night, and I sprinted into the woods, ignoring the biting branches that tore at my clothes. Driven by fright alone, I ran blindly, the cabin fading behind me, but through the trees. I could still see that haunting light, now chasing me. I stumbled, urgency overtaking caution, and somehow found myself deep in the woods, where the moonlight broke through the branches like silver fingers. I had lost all sense of direction, but I pushed through the panic, desperate to escape the being that pursued me with a relentless whisper. Eventually, I came upon the main road, my heart nearly bursting with the effort of survival. I didn't stop until I reached my car, fumbling the keys as my hands shook uncontrollably. I slammed the door shut, cranked the engine, feeling a rush of relief wash over me as I sped away, the cabin disappearing into the distance. Months passed, and I tried to put the experience behind me, convincing myself it was merely my imagination and the product of being alone in the dark. Yet, I still couldn't shake the whispers whenever the wind howled through the trees, or when autumn arrived, bringing back the memories of that cold night. This day, I refused to return to that cabin, and I discourage anyone I know from even going near that cursed spot. There are some things left better undisturbed, and some whispers that should never again be answered. What I encountered that night was a lesson learned, a reminder that there may be truths hidden in the dark, waiting patiently for someone to let them in. Story 2. It was a stormy evening when I decided to bring home an old wooden box I found at a flea market earlier that day. Intrigued by its intricate carvings and the air of mystery surrounding it, I couldn't resist the pull. The vendor had warned me not to open it, claiming it was a vessel of forgotten memories and lost souls, but curiosity got the better of me. I placed it on my desk, its presence looming over me as thunder rumbled in the distance. The night dragged on, and a sense of unease settled in, but I tried to shake it off. I sat down to watch television, using it as a distraction until the urge to open the box overwhelmed me. With trembling hands, I unlatched the rusty lock, and the moment it clicked open, a gust of cold wind rushed through the room, extinguishing my lamp and plunging me into darkness. My heart raced as I fumbled to find a light. Once I gathered enough courage, I lit a candle and approached the box, its contents shrouded in darkness. Inside, I found a collection of faded photographs, each depicting a different person, their faces blurred and expressions twisted, as though reflecting some internal torment. I felt an inexplicable connection to them, a chill crawling down my spine as I picked one up. It was a photograph of a young girl, eyes hollow and vacant. In the moment I turned it over, a name was scrawled in hurried handwriting, Clara. The name reverberated in my mind, as if it were calling to me. I set the photo aside, feeling uneasy yet compelled to explore further. Next, I pulled out a small, rusted key, strangely warm to the touch. I looked back into the box, hoping to find something that would explain its purpose, but only darkness stared back. Maybe it was a key to an old chest or some forgotten place. The air felt heavy, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Glancing around, I reminded myself that I was alone in my apartment. At least, that's what I thought. A shiver went through me when I heard a faint whisper, barely audible, but distinctly calling my name. I chalked it up to the storm outside, but deep down, that voice gnawed at my sanity. I shut the box and turned to turn on my computer, needing to distract myself from the eerie atmosphere. But every time I glanced at the box, an unsettling urge compelled me to open it again. It was as if the box was a living entity, drawing me into its darkness. Hours passed in a blur, and each time I allowed myself to peek, the items inside seemed to shift, photos changing positions, as if they were alive. Tired of the torment, I slammed the lid shut and decided to get some rest. The rain drummed against the windows as I lay in bed, haunted by the images I had seen. I tried to put it out of my mind, but sleep eluded me as shadows danced in the corners of my room. I couldn't tell if I was dreaming or awake when I heard Clara's voice again, clearer this time, urgent yet soft. "Help me," it pleaded, sending chills racing through my body. I shot up, heart pounding as I glanced around. The room felt foreign, the dark corners exuding an energy that made me feel suffocated. Resolutely, I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and dared myself to confront the box once more. Retrieving the candle to illuminate my path, I approached the desk as if it were a portal to another realm. The moment I unclasped the lid, the cold wind whipped through my apartment, and the voices escalated to a cacophony of whispers begging for release. I felt trapped, suffocated by the energy pulsing from the box. Rummaging through the items, I found another photograph, this one thicker and edged in gold. Flipping it over, the name Clara stared back at me, alongside a date, 1912. Realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Clara was long gone, but her spirit lingered, trapped and tormented. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on, bathing the room in a dull glow. I was frozen, unable to comprehend the abrupt change as I locked eyes with Clara's image. In a moment of clarity, I knew I had to help her. But how? Beneath the photographs were old letters, filled with anguish, detailing Clara's life in a world that had forgotten her. Each letter gripped my heart as it unfolded tales of despair and longing, haunting accounts of isolation and sorrow. I scribbled down key details in hopes of uncovering more about this girl who was spiraling into the depths of my reality. Days turned into weeks, my life melding into the eerie connection between Clara and me. I became fixated on unraveling the truth behind her existence, which led me to an old library, dusty archives filled with forgotten stories of the past. The more I learned, the deeper the connection grew. Clara was a girl who had lost her family to tragedy, left alone to navigate a cruel world she could no longer bear. That evening, I returned home with a sense of both relief and dread. The storm that had once filled me with fear now felt like the backdrop of a struggle between realms. Armed with the knowledge of her pain, I resolved to free her spirit. I lit candles and created a makeshift altar, placing the photographs around the box, my heart echoing with Clara's sorrow. As I closed my eyes and focused on the connection, I felt the room shift, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. Clara's voice enveloped me, whispering gentle yet desperate words. I spoke her name out loud, promising to help her find peace. The temperature dropped, and then just as quickly, warmth returned, filling the void. I sensed her sorrow begin to dissipate, the whispers transforming into soft, grateful breaths. I opened my eyes, and the chaos that had consumed me unraveled like ribbons in the wind. As dawn broke, the first rays of light illuminated the room. The box felt different, lighter. Inside, the photographs were gone, replaced by an ethereal glow. Clara was free. The horrors that had once haunted me changed into a sense of love and inner peace. I smiled, knowing I had bridged the gap between our worlds. From that day forward, I kept the box, a vessel of stories and a reminder that every soul longed for understanding even from beyond the grave. Story 3. I never believed in ghosts, or at least I didn't until the summer of 2017 when everything changed. The heat was unbearable, and I had decided to escape the city for a weekend, driving up to my uncle's old farmhouse that sat on the outskirts of a tiny town in the middle of nowhere. My uncle had passed away the previous winter, and the estate was now mine to inherit. I hadn't visited it in years, but I remembered it as a place filled with love and laughter, the scent of freshly baked pie wafting from the kitchen, and the sounds of crickets serenading the night. However, as I approached the house, a shiver crept up my spine. Something felt off. The paint was peeling, the shutters hung askew, and the garden that once flourished was overgrown and wild. I parked the car and took a deep breath, reminding myself that the house held memories I cherished. I stepped inside, the creaking floorboards echoing my arrival. Dust hung thick in the air as I wandered through the dimly lit rooms, memories flooding my mind. I spent the first day cleaning, opened the windows to let fresh air in, as I put my uncle's things in order, trying to make sense of the chaos. That night, I settled down with a glass of wine on the porch, enjoying the soft glow of the setting sun. As darkness enveloped the property, the only sounds were the rustling leaves and the faint hoot of an owl in the distance. As I stared into the woods beyond the house, I suddenly felt watched, an inexplicable sensation prickling the hairs on the back of my neck. I shook it off, attributing it to fatigue and an overactive imagination. But as I went inside to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just outside the reach of the light. The second night, I was jolted awake by a noise that seemed to echo through the empty house. It was a soft whisper, almost a sigh, barely audible but undeniably there. I lay in the darkness, heart racing, unsure if I should investigate or hide under the covers. The whisper came again, clearer this time, sounding like my name. It sent chills down my spine. "Is someone there?" I called out, my voice trembling. Silence. I waited, afraid to move, listening intently. Then, a cold gust of wind swept through the room, and the door creaked slowly open, revealing nothing but the moonlight spilling into the hallway. I was both terrified and intrigued. Compelled by an insatiable curiosity, I got out of bed and tiptoed down the hallway. The house groaned as it settled, and I felt the air grow colder as I approached the source of the noise, the attic. I had never been one to believe in the supernatural, but in that moment, I felt a weight pressing on my chest, urging me to turn back. Still, I climbed the creaky stairs, each step feeling like a descent into the unknown. As I reached the top, I hesitated, clutching the doorknob. I opened it slowly, revealing the dusty, moonlit space scattered with forgotten relics of my uncle's life. Just as I stepped inside, a shadow flitted past the corner of my eye. I turned quickly, but it was gone. My heart pounded in my chest as I made my way inside, the air thick with an unsettling energy. I noticed an old trunk in the corner and approached it, drawn inexplicably to its presence. I unlatched it, and as I opened the lid, I was hit with a wave of cold air. Inside were old photographs, letters, and mementos, a life preserved in dust. I rummaged through the contents, finding a photo of my uncle standing with a group of friends, their faces beaming with joy. But as I studied the image more closely, I noticed a shadowy figure lurking behind them, its face indistinct and haunting. I shuddered and quickly closed the trunk, feeling the weight of being watched once again. As I turned to leave, I heard it, the whisper once more, louder now, more insistent, almost pleading. "Help me." Panic surged through my veins. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the trunk as the temperature in the room plummeted. The shadows around me twisted and coalesced into forms that seemed to reach for me. The air was charged, and I could feel something pressing on my mind, a desperate yearning. I fled the attic in a rush, heart pounding like a drum, shutting the door behind me. I spent the rest of the night in a restless sleep, plagued by nightmares of the figure from the photograph, empty eyes staring in. Story 3. I never believed in ghosts, or at least I didn't until the summer of 2017 when everything changed. The heat was unbearable, and I had decided to escape the city for a weekend, driving up to my uncle's old farmhouse that sat on the outskirts of a tiny town in the middle of nowhere. My uncle had passed away the previous winter, and the estate was now mine to inherit. I hadn't visited it in years, but I remembered it as a place filled with love and laughter, the scent of freshly baked pie wafting from the kitchen, and the sounds of crickets serenading the night. However, as I approached the house, A shiver crept up my spine. Something felt off. The paint was peeling, the shutters hung askew, and the garden that once flourished was overgrown and wild. I parked the car and took a deep breath, reminding myself that the house held memories I cherished. I stepped inside, the creaking floorboards echoing my arrival. Dust hung thick in the air as I wandered through the dimly lit rooms, memories flooding my mind. I spent the first day cleaning, opened the windows to let fresh air in, as I put my uncle's things in order, trying to make sense of the chaos. That night, I settled down with a glass of wine on the porch, enjoying the soft glow of the setting sun. As darkness enveloped the property, the only sounds were the rustling leaves and the faint hoot of an owl in the distance. As I stared into the woods beyond the house, I suddenly felt watched, an inexplicable sensation prickling the hairs on the back of my neck. I shook it off, attributing it to fatigue and an overactive imagination. But as I went inside to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just outside the reach of the light. The second night, I was jolted awake by a noise that seemed to echo through the empty house. It was a soft whisper, almost a sigh, barely audible but undeniably there. I lay in the darkness, heart racing, unsure if I should investigate or hide under the covers. The whisper came again, clearer this time, sounding like my name. It sent chills down my spine. "Is someone there?" I called out, my voice trembling. Silence. I waited, afraid to move, listening intently. Then, a cold gust of wind swept through the room, and the door creaked slowly open, revealing nothing but the moonlight spilling into the hallway. I was both terrified and intrigued. Compelled by an insatiable curiosity, I got out of bed and tiptoed down the hallway. The house groaned as it settled, and I felt the air grow colder as I approached the source of the noise, the attic. I had never been one to believe in the supernatural, but in that moment, I felt a weight pressing on my chest, urging me to turn back. Still, I climbed the creaky stairs, each step feeling like a descent into the unknown. As I reached the top, I hesitated. Story 4. The forest loomed ahead, gnarled trees interweaving above, creating a canopy that blocked out the sun. It was a place I had always heard whispered about in town, a place where shadows seemed to have a life of their own and where children dared each other to venture but never returned. I had grown up listening to the stories, legends of lost souls and vengeful spirits, but curiosity gnawed at me like a persistent itch that wouldn't go away. One crisp autumn afternoon, I decided to confront the tales for myself. Armed with nothing but a flashlight and my ever-spiraling anxiety, I ventured into the shadowy embrace of the woods. As I stepped past the threshold into the forest, a chill swept through me, not just from the temperature, but from the ominous sense that I was being watched. It felt as if the trees themselves were leaning in, eager to overhear my every thought. With each step, the ground crunched beneath my feet, the sounds resonating eerily in the heavy silence. The deeper I wandered, the dimmer the light became. It was strange. The sun was still high in the sky, yet here, it felt like twilight. Suddenly, I stumbled upon a clearing. In its center stood an old, dilapidated cabin, wood rotting and overtaken by ivy. The air was thick with an unpleasant odor, a mix of decay and damp earth. I felt an unexplainable pull towards it, as if the cabin was inviting me closer despite every instinct screaming for me to turn back. Hesitantly, I approached, the floorboards creaking under my weight as I stepped inside. Dust danced in the thin beams of light breaking through the grimy windows, and the air felt heavy, charged with a sense of foreboding. I noticed a few pieces of furniture, shrouded in dust, as if they had not been touched for decades. It wasn't much, but strange symbols were carved into the walls, twisted sigils that sent shivers down my spine, an unsettling reminder of the stories I had heard. I shook off the sensation, reasoning with myself that they were just remnants of a forgotten time. As I explored further, a noise interrupted my thoughts, a faint whisper, almost like a sigh. I froze, my heart racing, and strained to listen. It was soft but persistent, as if something or someone was calling out from the depths of the cabin. I followed the sound, inching towards a door at the back. My every instinct screamed at me to stop, but curiosity propelled me forward. I reached for the doorknob, the metal cold against my palm, and slowly turned it. The door creaked open, revealing a dark basement that seemed to stretch into oblivion. The whispers grew louder, echoing off the walls. I hesitated, stepping back, but the allure of the unknown was too strong. I flicked my flashlight on and descended the creaking staircase, the beam of light cutting through the darkness. With each step, the temperature dropped, my breath visible in puffs of fog. At the bottom, I found a small room, its walls damp and covered in more of the strange sigils. In the center of the room was what appeared to be an altar, stones arranged in a perfect circle, the centerpiece a grotesque figure hammered out of iron, twisted and grotesque, with hollow eyes that seemed to gaze into my soul. The whispers evolved into a cacophony of voices, rising and falling like an unholy chant, and with that, panic surged through me. I turned to flee, but as I did, the whispers transformed into manic laughter, swirling around me, drowning out my own thoughts. I sprinted back up the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest, but as I reached the top, the door shut with a deafening bang. I clawed at it, my nails scraping against the wood, but it wouldn't budge. Desperation flooded my veins. From behind me, I heard a soft giggle, a sound so chilling that every hair on my body stood on end. I spun around, flashlight trembling in my grip, illuminating the figures that had emerged from the shadows. They were children, pale and gaunt, their eyes wide and devoid of life. They wore torn clothing, faces painted with a twisted mix of glee and sorrow. They danced around me, fading in and out of existence, their laughter echoing in my ears as the air grew thick with despair. It was a grotesque carnival of lost souls, each one trapped in a moment of joy that had long been stripped of its innocence. I could feel their sorrow, their longing for escape mirroring my own. I stumbled back, falling against the door, and in that moment, I realized the truth. They were the children from the town, the ones who had wandered too far and were never seen again. The woods caressed them, kept their spirits bound within its dark embrace, and now I was to join them, a new voice in their maddening choir of laughter. In sheer terror, I closed my eyes, desperately wishing to wake from this nightmare. When I opened them again, the laughter had ceased, replaced by an eerie silence. The door was ajar, swaying gently as if inviting me to leave. I bolted into the fading daylight, not daring to look back. The forest seemed to part from me, the trees whispering as I ran, an unfathomable sadness woven into their rustling leaves. Bursting into the clearing, I felt the weight of the cabin's darkness lift as I reached the edge of the woods, the sun finally breaking free from its prison overhead. I didn't stop running until I was safely back in town, my heart pounding and my breath ragged. But sleep never came that night. The whispers followed me, infecting my dreams with the haunting laughter of those lost children, their eyes peering through the veil of darkness, reminders that some places are meant to be forgotten and that curiosity can sometimes lead to horror. Though the town folk saw me return, they could never know the truth. I had ventured into those woods, and now, a part of me was forever trapped there, lost among the shadows, echoing the laughter of those who were lost long before me. To this day, I never return to the forest, nor do I speak of it. But every night, as I lay in bed, the whispers rise, reminding me that some doors, once opened, are better left ajar. Story 5. It was an unremarkable evening when I decided to take a solitary stroll through my town's old cemetery, a place where the whisper of wind through aged stones told tales of the past. As a child, I found solace among the tombstones, fascinated by the stories engraved in weathered marble. But now, as an adult, those stories bore a different weight. The sun dipped beneath the horizon, casting long shadows that danced between the graves, and a sense of unease crept over me. I could feel the chill of the encroaching night, a shiver that wasn't just from the cool air, but something deeper. While my footsteps crunched on the gravel, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, as if the very stones were alive, as peering from the dark crevices of history. I brushed it off as my imagination. After all, the mind plays tricks in the quiet solitude of dusk. Yet, as I wandered deeper into the forgotten corners of the cemetery, I felt a magnetic pull, as if something was guiding me, urging me to continue. The moon hung low, a haunting orb illuminating the path ahead, and I found myself drawn to an ancient oak, its gnarled roots encircling an unseen grave. The air grew heavy, saturated with the scent of damp earth and decay. I knelt beside the grave, curiosity overriding the lingering dread that wrapped around my chest. The unmarked stone was slick with moss, and instinctively my fingers brushed against it, feeling the coolness beneath the surface. A name finally became visible as I wiped away the grime. Evelyn Rose. With an inexplicable connection, I felt as if I knew her, though I had never heard of her before. Questions flooded my mind. Who was she? Why was she forgotten? As I sat there lost in thought, the atmosphere shifted. The breeze turned sharp, and an eerie stillness enveloped me. I felt a presence behind me, an overwhelming sensation of someone or something looming. Heart racing, I turned, but there was nothing but shadows dancing between graves. I tried to convince myself it was simply my vivid imagination at play, yet a low, whispering sound began to ripple through the cemetery, as if the wind was trying to convey a message. Straining to listen, the chilling words became distinguishable, a beckoning plea wrapped in sorrow. "Help me, find me," the voice echoed, weaving through the surrounding trees and resting heavily on my chest. I glanced around, unease settling in my bones at the thought of being so utterly alone in this haunted place. My instincts screamed to flee, yet I felt compelled to stay, dragged by an invisible thread toward the unmarked gravestone of Evelyn Rose. "What do you need?" I found myself calling into the void, my voice trembling yet defiant. Silence fell, thick and suffocating, before I felt a rush of cold wind sweep past me. Following it was the sudden crack of a twig snapping nearby. Panic surged through my veins, and with every ounce of brave foolishness, I rose, determined to face whatever lingered within this graveyard. I looked toward the sound, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm. The shadows cast by the moon formed shapes that twisted and rustled unnaturally, pulling me closer to the heart of the whispering. Suddenly, a figure materialized before me, ethereal yet unmistakably human. It was a woman dressed in a tattered white gown, her hair long and wild, flowing around her as if she had emerged from the depths of the earth itself. Her eyes bore an unearthly sadness, a deep well of sorrow that beckoned me to understand her plight. "Evelyn," I whispered, my voice barely breaking through the tremors of fear and uncertainty coursing through me. She nodded, faintly, before extending a hand toward me, the air crackling with a strange energy. Her lips moved, but the wind carried her words away, leaving only a ghostly echo in the chill of the night. "Help me. I'm lost." My heart ached with empathy, drawn to her tragic plight. As I took a step forward, I could feel the earth beneath my feet shifting, as if recognizing her presence. I glanced back at her grave, wondering what had happened, why she had been abandoned in this desolate place. "What can I do?" I asked, searching the depths of her sorrowful gaze for answers. In response, she pointed toward the far end of the cemetery, where the trees grew thick and overshadowed an area that felt different, an energy pulsing under the earth that begged for release. "Find it," she murmured, her voice fragile. I felt the strain of her words wrap around my heart, urging me to move. Without another thought, I hurried toward the trees, my pulse racing, every sense heightened as shadows stretched toward me from unseen realms. With each step, the air thickened, electrified by unseen forces yearning to break free to tell their story. Reaching a small clearing, I knelt, feeling something beneath the soil, strange and powerful. My hands clawed at the earth, and it yielded to my touch, revealing a small, rusted locket half buried in the graveyard's secrets. As I lifted it, Evelyn whispered a sound of relief and sorrow intertwined. Tears streamed down her translucent cheek, and she pointed to the locket, gesturing for me to open it. My fingers trembled as I pried it open. Inside lay a faded photograph of a young girl with dark curls and a joyful smile, a heartfelt message written on the back that read, "To my dearest Evelyn, always and forever." In that moment, the shadows around me danced wildly, and the wind howled with a cacophony of voices. I remember, Evelyn finally spoke, her voice clear and resonant now, breaking the barrier of despair that had shrouded her. "Thank you." A warmth enveloped me, and with a gentle swish, she began to dissipate into the night air, her spirit breaking free from the chains of sorrow that had held her captive for so long. The cemetery shimmered, glowing softly under the moonlight as if awakened from a deep sleep. In her absence, I understood the bond that tied us to the past, and the stories that threaded through time like veins of gold. I stood in shock, locket clutched tightly in my hand, feeling an overwhelming weight lifted from the air around me as her presence lingered one last moment. The rest of the cemetery was quiet, but I knew I had been a part of something profound, a connection to a life lost, to a spirit-seeking peace. I left the cemetery that night with a heavy heart, yet lighter in spirit, understanding that some stories remain woven into the very fabric of places we think we know, waiting for someone to listen. As I walked home, the world felt different, rich with stories untold, and I found comfort in knowing that sometimes, understanding the past means freeing those who cannot do it themselves. And in that understanding, we find our own peace. Story 6. I still remember the night that changed everything for me. The night I faced the darkness that had been simmering beneath the surface of my life for far too long. It was a cold winter evening, the kind where the air is crisp and biting, and the moon hung high in the sky, casting an eerie glow over everything. I had recently moved to a small, isolated town nestled deep within the woods, seeking tranquility after a tumultuous few years in the city. The locals were friendly enough, but I couldn't shake an unsettling feeling that others were aware of something I wasn't, as though they were all part of a collective secret. I pushed these thoughts aside, convincing myself it was merely the anxiety of starting over. The day began like any other, but as dusk approached, I became restless. I decided to take a walk through the woods bordering my new home, hoping to find solace in nature. The trees towered overhead, their branches intertwining like fingers clenching against the darkness. My footsteps were muffled by the layer of frost coating the ground, and a stillness enveloped me. As I walked deeper into the woods, an inexplicable sense of dread began to creep in, gnawing at my insides. I tried to rationalize my fear, dismissing it as the result of my imagination running wild in the solitude. Suddenly, I heard a rustling sound, and my heart raced. I stopped, straining to catch a glimpse of what it was. Just a deer, I assured myself, but as I peered into the thick underbrush, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a woman, disheveled and dressed in tattered clothing, her eyes wild and sunken. She stared at me as if she had seen something horrifying, but before I could speak or make sense of the situation, she turned and vanished deeper into the trees. Instinct urged me to follow her, but caution held me back. Instead, I hurried back to my home, the unease lingering like a fog. That night, I locked all my doors and windows, convinced that something was off. Sleep was elusive, filled with nightmares that turned my dreams into twisted reflections of what I had seen. I awoke in a cold sweat, heart racing, the image of the woman etched into my mind. I dismissed it as a figment of my imagination, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Over the following days, I noticed small things, whispers in the wind, fleeting shadows in the corners of my eyes, and the murmurs of townsfolk that hushed as I approached. My imagination ran rampant, spiraling into paranoia. Fear gripped me like a vice, and I became a prisoner in my own home. One evening, driven by a mixture of fear and curiosity, I returned to the spot where I had encountered the woman, hoping to find answers. The woods were eerily quiet, the oppressive silence swallowing me whole. Unease pooled in my stomach as I pressed deeper. Then, I heard it again, the rustling, followed by a soft crying sound. My heart raced as I followed the noise, trembling with trepidation. The crying grew louder, more sorrowful, pulling me like a moth to a flame. I stumbled upon a clearing and gasped. There, in the center, was the woman, her face lined with tears, hands clutching the earth, as if trying to pull something from the ground. I was rooted to the spot, a mix of fear and empathy coursing through me. "Are you okay?" I called out, though deep down I knew she wasn't. Her head snapped up, locking eyes with me, and I was taken aback by the anguish and desperation reflected in her gaze. "Help me," she whispered, and my heart broke. She pointed to a spot beside her, eyes wide and frantic, as though I alone could save her from whatever demon plagued her. I took a hesitant step forward, fear battling with compassion. "What do you need?" I asked, but before she could respond, a shadow passed behind her, a dark figure looming ominously. In that moment, instinct took over, and I turned to run, feverishly darting through the trees, branches clawing at my skin. I could hear her voice, faint and pleading, but I focused on escaping whatever had taken hold of her. I ran until I could no longer hear her cries, collapsing against a tree, gasping for breath. Days turned into weeks, and I could not shake the vision of her. Her sorrow had burrowed into my mind, and I began to research the history of the town, digging through archives at the local library. What I found chilled me to the bone. Years ago, a woman had gone missing in those very woods. She was said to be a witch, shunned and ridiculed by the townspeople. Rumors claimed she had cursed the land, and ever since, strange occurrences had plagued the town, disappearances, madness, and whispers of dark forces in the night. I felt like a moth to a flame, drawn to the terrifying history. I returned to the woods, each time hoping to find the woman, to uncover what had happened to her. My obsession grew, and I could sense the townsfolk watching, their eyes filled with knowing pity. They tried to warn me, but I was too far gone, too entwined in the mystery. I began to see shadows lurking in my peripheral vision, hear whispers following me home. One night, fueled by desperation and the faintest hope of finding closure for both her and myself, I ventured out again, armed with nothing but a flashlight. The woods were more oppressive than ever, as though they were alive, breathing, taunting me with every step I took. I repeated the woman's name over and over, hoping it would call her forth. When I reached the clearing, fear wrapped around me like a shroud. The air was thick and electric, the moon casting a ghostly glow. Then I saw her, standing in the center as before, the quiet sobs echoing in the night. "You came," she said, her voice laced with a haunting melody. "You're the only one who can help?" I stepped forward, but before I could ask how, the shadow appeared again behind her, darker and more tangible than before. The sense of dread consumed me, and I froze, watching as it reached out, curling around the woman, drawing her into the abyss. In an instant, everything shifted. The air felt thick with agony, and a chilling wind engulfed me, whispering secrets from the dark. I had been drawn into something far beyond my understanding, and as the figure loomed closer, I realized it wasn't just a manifestation of fear. It was the darkness, the curse of the woods, the town's hidden shame. That night, I fled in terror, vowing never to return. The echoes of her cries haunt me to this day, a reminder of how close I came to losing myself to the darkness. My time in that town ended, but the lingering shadows remain, whispering tales of a witch and the souls she ensnared. I've since moved on, but I often ponder her fate. Did I save her, or was I just a pawn in a much larger game? The woods are still there, and I know I can never go back, but I fear the whispers of that night will follow me forever, a reminder of the darkness within and the horrors that lie beyond the veil of understanding. Story 7. The oppressive weight of night pressed down on the small house at the edge of the woods. I had always been fascinated by the stories my grandmother told me about the forest, a place where shadows seemed to dance and whispers echoed through the trees. But as I sat alone in that creaky old home during the long, cold, dark nights, I began to realize that there are stories better left untold. It began on an October evening, when the wind howled outside and the leaves rustled like distant voices. I had just settled down with a book, trying to immerse myself in tales of adventure, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. There was something about the way the shadows shifted, almost as if they were alive, and for every flicker of candlelight, I felt a chilling presence creeping closer. But still, I pressed on, recalling my grandmother's words, "The woods don't forget." It was a phrase that hung in the air like smoke, a reminder that some things are better left undisturbed. As the clock struck midnight, the house was engulfed in silence, and I felt an overwhelming urge to explore outside. I grabbed a flashlight and slipped on my jacket, stepping cautiously onto the damp ground, leaves crunching beneath my feet as I made my way toward the dark line of trees. My heart raced with a mix of fear and excitement as I ventured deeper into the shadows, the beam of my flashlight illuminating twisted branches that reached out like skeletal fingers, gnarled and desperate. With every step, the air grew thicker, heavy with a dampness that felt alive. It wrapped around me like a shroud. I could hear the faintest whispers, echoing through the bark and leaves, and they seemed to carry a weight of warning, a language I couldn't decipher but felt deep within my bones. The deeper I went, the more the shadows seemed to thicken, and the whispers became louder, swirling around me like angry bees. It was then I saw it, a flicker of movement just ahead. My heart leaped into my throat as I directed my flashlight toward the source, revealing a clearing bathed in a ghostly glow. In the center stood an old, dilapidated cabin, its walls entwined with vines and moss, giving it an almost sinister appearance. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to turn back, but curiosity gnawed at me. I approached the cabin, the whispers growing frantic, urging me to leave. I pushed open the creaking door, which protested with a groan as if warning me to turn back. Inside, the air was stale and thick, filled with the scent of decay. The furniture lay covered in sheets, the dust particles swirling in the weak beam of my flashlight. I felt an inexplicable pull toward a wooden chest in the corner, its surface etched with strange symbols that resembled the tales my grandmother told of ancient spirits trapped in the forest. Against all reason, I lifted the heavy lid. Inside lay old trinkets, photo frames with faded images, and a small leather-bound journal. My hands trembled as I picked it up, an icy chill running down my spine when I opened it and began to read. The pages were filled with frantic scrawls, detailing the writer's descent into madness after encountering something in the woods, something that watched him, whispered to him, and eventually took him. The last entry sent chills through me. It knows my name. It knows all of our names. It will come for you. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, and I felt a cold breath on my neck that sent goosebumps racing across my skin. With a surge of panic, I slammed the journal shut and stumbled backward, the cabin's walls seeming to close in around me. The whispers turned to a cacophony, filling my head with a primal fear I couldn't explain. I spun around, scrambling for the door, but it swung shut with a force that rattled the wooden structure, trapping me inside. I was engulfed in darkness, the flashlight flickering wildly before succumbing to the encroaching shadow. Heart pounding, I fumbled for the door, but it would not budge. Something unseen held it fast. A low growl reverberated through the floorboards, and out of the corners of my vision, I saw shapes moving, darting just beyond the reach of my flashlight's beam. Panic surged in my chest as I frantically searched for another way out. Then I remembered the window. I raced toward it, desperation fueling my movements. As I slammed against the frame, it groaned in protest but finally gave way, sending shards of glass showering around me as I tumbled outside and rolled down the embankment into the underbrush. I gasped for breath, the cool night air filling my lungs as I glanced back at the cabin and froze. Shadows swirled at the windows, dark figures pressed against the glass, their faces obscured but their eyes gleaming with an otherworldly hunger. I fled, the whispers nipping at my heels, urging me to come back, to stay with them forever. The forest seemed to shift around me, branches clawing at my clothes, roots lashing at my feet as I stumbled through the darkness. I eventually burst into the clearing where my house stood, breathless and trembling. As I slammed the door behind me, the whispers faded into the wind, but I knew they were still out there, watching, waiting for the next curious soul to wander into their realm. I never spoke of that night again, but I often wondered if the stories were true. The woods don't forget, and neither do the shadows that stir within them. I couldn't shake the feeling that they would come for me one day, drawn by my fear, or perhaps my name. Story 8. I still remember the night it happened, not because of the events that transpired, but because of the overwhelming sense of dread that clung to me long after. It was late October, a time when the air was crisp and the leaves rustled like whispers in the wind. I had just moved into a small, run-down apartment on the outskirts of town, a place that had seen better days. The landlord was a balding, nervous man who barely made eye contact, hastily shuffling me through the paperwork as he spoke about the building's history. I didn't think much of it at the time. After all, every old building has a story, some more sinister than others. My neighbors were largely absent, and I often found myself alone, wandering the empty halls where the flickering lights cast shadows that danced eerily against the peeling wallpaper. On one of those chilly October nights, I resolved to explore my new home. Armed only with a flashlight and curiosity, I descended to the basement level, which the landlord warned was off-limits, a place he described using words like unsafe and forgotten. Of course, that made it all the more enticing. The musty air wrapped around me like a damp blanket as I reached the bottom of the stairs. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating stacks of boxes that seemed to hold the remnants of lives once lived. As I picked through the contents, a blend of dusty books, old clothes, and broken furniture, I noticed a door at the far end of the basement, slightly ajar. A chill ran down my spine, a premonition of something waiting beyond that threshold. Despite every logical fiber screaming at me to turn back, I crept closer, heart racing in time with the echoes of my footsteps. I pushed the door open, a creak reverberating through the silence. Inside was a small room, untouched by time, almost as if it were a forgotten sanctuary. Its walls were lined with peeling photographs, faces frozen in smiles long erased by the passage of time, and in the center stood a single, decrepit armchair, threadbare and sagging. I felt a strange pull toward it, and, despite the unsettling ambience, I sat down. It felt oddly comforting, a warmth enveloping me as though I were meant to be there. That's when I heard it, a soft whisper, barely audible, but distinct enough to send shivers down my spine. "Help me." The voice seemed to echo within the confines of my mind, and I blinked, expecting someone to emerge from the shadows to explain the disembodied plea. No one came. My initial fear morphed into a compulsion to understand. "Who are you?" I called softly, my voice trembling as I leaned back in the chair. The air grew heavier, suffused with tension, and that's when I saw it, a flicker in the corner of my eye, a dark shape slithering along the edge of the room. It darted behind the armchair, and in that moment, instinct propelled me to stand. "Show yourself," I shouted, the bravado sounding hollow even to my own ears. I turned to confront whatever lurked behind me, but there was nothing, just shadows. That's when I felt it, a cold hand grasping my shoulder, fingers digging in with a grip that paralyzed me with fear. I spun around, but the room was empty. My heart raced as panic flooded my senses. I stumbled back, nearly collapsing in the chair again, desperately searching for a logical explanation. But the whispers grew louder, more frantic, now pleading, "You have to help me. They won't let me go." Something primal inside me urged me to flee, to escape the oppressive atmosphere saturated with despair. I stumbled out of the room, slamming the door behind me, hearing the echo of a mournful wail that sent another wave of terror crashing over me. I bolted up the stairs. The darkness seemed to wrap around me like a shroud, the shadows elongating and twisting with each step I took. I could hear faint murmurs trailing behind me, and I knew I wasn't alone. I made it back to my apartment, the doors slamming shut with a finality that left me breathless. I leaned against it, quieting my racing heart, desperate for sanity to reclaim its hold on me. The rest of the night was a blur of anxiety and sleeplessness, the whispers echoing in my mind, a chant of sorrow that would not relent. I called my friend the next morning, needing a sounding board for the nightmarish events, but as I relayed my story, I noticed her tone shift. "You need to get out of that place," she said, voice laced with concern. "People say it's haunted. You might have stumbled upon something." Her voice trailed off, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts. I dismissed her words as urban legends, never truly believing in spirits or hauntings. But that didn't eliminate the fear that gnawed at me in the ensuing weeks. I tried to ignore the whispers, chalking them up to stress and sleep deprivation, but they became a haunting melody woven into the fabric of my life. Each night, they crescendoed into frantic pleas, and the cold hand returned, growing more insistent, leaving bruises on my shoulder that I sought to hide. By the end of the month, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to know more about the history of the apartment, even if it meant facing the specter who had claimed me as its own. I spent hours at the local library, poring over old newspapers and town records, uncovering snippets of the past, the building once a thriving house for troubled souls, but a fire had taken too many lives. The whispers intensified as I pieced together the grim fate of those lost, tethered to the earthly realm by their unresolved sorrow. The final revelation chilled me to the bone. The name in the old records matched the voice that haunted my nights. It belonged to a woman who had lived in my apartment, a name intertwined with tragedy and heartache, the echoes of her life resonating in the very walls of the place I called home. That night, I sat in the dark, the atmosphere heavy with sorrow, and for the first time, I spoke aloud. "I hear you. I want to help." The whispers faded, replaced with an almost palpable silence, a silence that felt lighter, almost hopeful. I sat in that solitude, decidedly calm, and though I was unsure if I truly connected with the ghost, I felt that I had acknowledged her pain. The following days passed with a newfound peace, the suffocating whispers receding to a hum, and the cold grip on my shoulder loosened. It wasn't until a week later that I felt the weight of her absence. Gone were the shadows that danced in the corners, replaced by a serene quiet, and I dared to believe I had helped her find rest. But in that still silence, I began to wonder, did I help her, or had I merely made way for another to fill the void? The nights crept on, and my heart would race at the thought of a different voice now echoing in the back of my mind, a voice that wasn't hers. I could almost hear laughter, soft, low, and sinister, flitting through the dark corners of my apartment, unsettling yet tantalizing, as a new story awaited to unfold within the confines of my haunted home. Story 9. It was a night much like any other. I had just moved into a small, dilapidated house on the outskirts of town, seeking solitude and a fresh start after a painful breakup. The locals spoke in hushed tones about the house, warning me of its dark history, but I brushed them off, attributing it to small-town superstition. I unpacked my belongings, the air thick with dust and memories of previous tenants long gone. Late at night, as I lay in bed, exhaustion finally overtook me, and I sank into a restless sleep, only to be jolted awake by a sound, a faint whisper echoing through the hallway, like a soft breeze carrying a secret. I sat up, my heart racing, convinced I imagined it, but then I heard it again, clearer this time, a voice, gentle yet insistent, calling out my name. I shook the fog of sleep from my mind and crept downstairs, the floorboards creaking beneath my tentative steps. The voice grew louder, leading me to the middle of the dark room that had once been a living space. The shadows twisted and turned, playing tricks on my eyes, but I pressed on. As I reached the center of the room, I felt a chill in the air, a presence that enveloped me. It was then that I noticed an old mirror hanging crookedly on the wall, its surface tarnished and dusty. There was something oddly compelling about it, as if it were beckoning me closer. I reached out, my fingers grazing the surface, and suddenly the room fell silent. In the dim light, I saw a flicker, a reflection, not of myself, but of another figure behind me, a woman with hollow eyes and a sorrowful expression that sent shivers down my spine. She seemed to be trapped within the glass, her mouth moving silently as if she were trying to warn me. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest, and the whispers returned, now frantic, filled with anguish. The air grew heavy, oppressive, as I felt the weight of her sorrow pressing down on me. I stumbled out of the room, fear propelling me back to the safety of my own bed, but sleep eluded me, haunted by her mournful gaze. Days turned into weeks, each night bringing the same cycle of whispers and mirror reflections. I began to notice strange occurrences, objects moving from their places, shadows darting at the edge of my vision, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. I sought help, consulting the townsfolk who had once warned me. They spoke of a tragedy that occurred in the house long ago. A woman had vanished, her spirit forever bound to the home. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was reaching out to me, her story begging to be told. Compelled by an inexplicable need to understand her plight, I began researching the house's history, poring over old newspapers and town records. I discovered that the woman had lived there in the early 1900s, a beloved figure in the community, until one day she simply disappeared without a trace, leaving behind friends and family desperate for answers. The pieces fell into place. The sorrow in her eyes mirrored the pain of all those left behind. I felt a kinship with her, her loneliness echoing my own. One night, armed with the knowledge I had gathered, I faced the mirror once more. The air around me crackled with tension as I called out to her, vowing to help her find peace. Her reflection flickered before me, and for the first time, I saw a hint of light in her eyes, a glimmer of hope. I closed my eyes, feeling the depth of her sorrow, and I whispered her name, repeating it like a mantra. Suddenly, the whispers intensified, swirling around me like a storm. I felt lost in the chaos, but I held firm, focusing on her pain, her need for resolution. The room shook as if the very foundation of the house were trembling at my resolve. Then, with a pulse of energy that surged through my body, I felt the mirror ripple like water, and I knew she was reaching out. I opened my eyes to find her standing before me, her figure shimmering with an ethereal glow. She smiled gently, her pain receding as she became more translucent, an expression of gratitude washing over her features. With one final look, she turned and walked into the depths of the mirror, disappearing as if she had never been there. The whispers faded into silence, and a profound calm enveloped the room. I stepped back, heart racing yet full of relief, and felt a shift within myself. The weight of sadness that had clung to the house began to dissipate, replaced with a lightness that hadn't existed before. I knew that I had helped her find her way home, releasing her spirit from the bonds that had held her captive for so long. From that night on, the house felt different, welcoming, as if it had finally found peace, too. I still lived there for some time, but the eerie whispers and shadowy figures that once haunted my nights had vanished, replaced by a comforting stillness. I learned to embrace the quiet solitude, reflecting on the bond one shared with the woman trapped in the mirror, a reminder that we all carry our stories, and sometimes, just sometimes, we find the courage to set each other free. Story 10. The night was darker than usual, a thick fog rolling in from the dense woods that bordered our small town. I think we all sensed something that evening, an unshakable dread that clung to us like the humid air. I remember sitting on my porch, a half-melted ice cream cone in my hand, when my neighbor Sarah came rushing over, her face pale and her eyes wide. "Did you hear the stories about the old Miller house?" she asked breathlessly, breathing hard as though she had raced all the way from her house. I had heard the whispers, the tales of strange lights and sounds coming from the dilapidated structure that loomed at the end of our street, but I had always chalked them up to the overactive imaginations of our small-town gossipers. "Yeah, but it's just an old house, right?" I shrugged it off, trying to sound unconcerned, but deep down, my heart thumped a little louder. "No, you don't understand. People have gone missing near their kids who thought it'd be fun to explore. They never came back. They say the house has a mind of its own," Sarah insisted, her voice trembling as she spoke. I glanced down the darkened pathway leading to the house, its silhouette barely visible through the swirling fog. I'd never been brave enough to venture down there, and now fear gripped me. But curiosity gnawed at me like hunger. "Let's check it out," I suggested, trying to sound more courageous than I felt. Sarah looked at me, eyes wide with disbelief. "You're kidding, right?" "No, really. We'll just take a look. We'll be safe. Besides, it's just an old house," I replied, but my voice wavered slightly. What were we thinking? Ignoring my better judgment, we set out, armed with only flashlights and the bravado of youth, stumbling through the thick fog that felt like fingers wrapping around us. As we approached the house, the air grew colder, almost biting against my skin. The trees seemed to lean in, as if eavesdropping on our every word. The stories had said that the previous owner, Old Man Miller, had gone mad and locked himself away in the house after the death of his wife, a tragedy that plagued the town for years. The front door creaked loudly as we pushed it open, the sound echoing like a warning through the stillness. Inside, the house smelled of decay, dust motes dancing in the beam of my flashlight. The walls were lined with old photographs, faded faces staring back at us, their expressions haunting. It felt as though the house was alive, breathing in the secrets and sorrows of its past. "Maybe we should turn back," Sarah said, her voice trembling as she glanced at the dark corners. I hesitated, but curiosity urged me on. "Just a little further," I insisted, leading the way down a narrow hallway that seemed to stretch infinitely ahead. Shadows flickered in the corners of my vision, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, and I could see my breath fogging in front of me. The sound of whispering drifted through the hall, soft and unintelligible, sending shivers down my spine. Panic gripped me, but I pressed on. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely a sound above a breath. "Yeah, but it's probably just the wind," I lied, trying to convince myself. I turned a corner, and there, at the end of the hallway, stood an old wardrobe, its doors slightly ajar. "Come on, let's take a look," I urged, feeling a mix of fear and adrenaline. As I gripped the handle, the whispers intensified, a chorus of voices mingling into a cacophony that sent chills racing down my spine. I threw the doors wide open, and inside, I found nothing but dust and empty hangers swaying gently as if stirred by an unseen force. Disappointment washed over me, but just as I was about to turn away, a piece of paper caught my eye, fluttering slightly in the draft. I pulled it out, and my heart dropped as I read the words scrawled in a hasty hand. "They are watching. Don't trust them." My blood ran cold. We needed to leave. "Sarah, we have to go. Now." I spun around, but she wasn't there. "Sarah," I called, panic rising in my throat. The house felt alive, the walls closing in as I turned in circles, feeling as though I were trapped in a nightmare. Just then, I heard her voice, a distant echo calling for me, but it sounded strangely distorted, as if carried through water. I ran towards where I believed her voice had come from, desperately searching in every shadowed corner. The whispers grew louder, drowning out my own heartbeat. "Sarah," I yelled, the sound swallowed by the dark. I stumbled into a room, and the door slammed shut behind me with a deafening thud, trapping me in total darkness. My flashlight flickered, and for a brief moment, I saw them, figures moving just outside the door, their faces twisted in silent screams. "Let me out." I pounded on the door, but no sound escaped my lips. Despair clawed at my chest as I realized the truth. The house didn't want to let me go. In an instant, the darkness deepened, and the whispers transformed into laughter, mocking and cruel. Just as I felt I would lose my sanity, the door swung open, revealing Sarah standing there, her face pale and wide-eyed. "We need to leave now," she gasped, dragging me back into the hallway. We bolted towards the exit, our footsteps echoing in the stillness. As we reached the front door, I glanced back one last time, and for a fleeting moment, I swear I saw Old Man Miller standing behind us, his face twisted in rage and despair, his eyes hollow. We burst through the door and ran, not stopping until we reached the safety of the streetlights outside. Gasping for breath, I vowed I would never return to that house. Years passed, but the memory never faded. I moved away after high school, but the story still lingered. Sometimes I hear whispers in the night, and sometimes, just sometimes, I feel the chilling breath of the house on my neck, reminding me that some places are better left alone. And I wonder, whatever happened to Sarah? Story 11. They told me the house was old, sure, but not haunted, just full of drafty corners, creaky stairs, and shadows that seemed to stretch a little too long when the light hit them wrong. But that didn't matter to me, not at first, because I was desperate, broke, and sick of living in my car. So I ignored the price, the smell, and the strange way the seller's hand trembled when I signed the deed, laughing when he said I shouldn't dig too deep into the basement or ever open the little black door. Under the stairs, the one with rusted hinges and 7 padlocks across its face like a wound held closed, and I thought, hell, maybe it's a boiler or some old fuse box he didn't want to deal with, because landlords always hide their messes and pass them on. And I've seen worse in city apartments crawling with rats, but still, I noticed things, little things, like how my phone never held a charge in the house and how my dreams, once dull and forgettable, began to stretch into vivid, unbearable. Epics of screaming walls, weeping ceilings, and a woman with broken fingers scratching something invisible in the corners of my bedroom at night while whispering my name with a mouth that didn't move. And every morning I'd wake up tired, teeth aching, throat dry, feet sore, and I'd think maybe I was just adjusting. Maybe the place needed some work. But when I found long, dark strands of hair in my food, hair I couldn't have grown, hair that smelled like iron and soil and wet ash. I started eating. Only prepackaged meals in sealed cans, yet still it happened, and my fridge began to hum in a voice, a pitch, not mechanical, but emotional, like the way a person might hum when they're trying not to cry, and I laughed it off, again, because I had nowhere else to go. And denial is a warm blanket when the nights are so cold your breath hangs like a body in the air. But then the light started going out, not flickering, but dying all at once, whole circuits failing, only to return without reason. And the walls seemed to move, just slightly, like they were breathing, like the plaster was soft and moist, and the windows fogged over even in the heat, always from the inside, and sometimes, just sometimes, when I looked into the fog, I saw the outline of someone else on the other side, though I was alone, or so I thought, until the phone rang, a landline I didn't install, from a phone I never found, and when I answered, there was only the sound of something chewing wetly and breathing like it. Had too many lungs, too many mouths, and then came the voice, low and soft, like it was in my head, or under my bed, or behind my eyes, and it said, "Stop looking for the door," which I hadn't thought about in weeks. But now, of course, I couldn't stop thinking about it, because it was there, under the stairs, behind the boxes of old books and the broken chairs and the dust-covered portraits of people whose faces looked more familiar the longer I stared at them. And one night I dreamed I stood before the black door, keys in hand, eyes bleeding, body swaying to the rhythm of something that lived deeper than the foundation, and I could hear them, hundreds, maybe thousands, chanting behind the door, begging for light, for air, for me. And when I woke, the keys were in my hand, real, cold, damp, and smelling of something old and burned, and the locks, those 7 rusted padlocks, were open, hanging loose like dead hands on a corpse, and I remember screaming, or trying to, but no sound came. Ow, just a rush of heat, a wave of rot, and the realization that the door was cracked, just a little, enough to smell the mildew and copper and meat behind it, and I ran, left the house, slept in my car again. But even there, the dreams found me, louder now, closer, and the voice whispered that running was useless, that the house had already taken something from me I couldn't get back, my shadow, maybe, or my name, and I knew it was right, because I didn't remember my own last name anymore. Didn't remember where I worked, or who I used to call, or why my hand shook when I touched water or mirrors or crosses, and so I went back, because it was mine, after all, my name on the deed, my blood in the pipes, my breath in the walls. And when I opened the black door, really opened it, it didn't swing or creak or groan, it sighed, like something had waited too long to be seen, and beyond it was a tunnel, not built but born, all red flesh and slow pulsing veins. And the floor was soft, too. Soft, like tongues or worms or breathing leather, and the air was thick with the sound of weeping, but not human, not animal either, something in between, and I walked, because I couldn't stop, because my legs didn't listen to me anymore, and deeper I went. Deeper into the hot dark, past carvings on the walls that moved when I looked away, past bones that didn't look like bones but more like exoskeletons twisted into praying poses, past piles of dolls with no eyes and no seams and mouths, stitched open with hair, until I found the chamber, a heart-shaped room that pulsed with a rhythm that matched my own heartbeat, and in its center was her, the woman from my dreams, from the walls, from the mirror behind my eyes, and she turned to me with no face, just skin pulled tight like wax over something ancient and angry, and she whispered, "You are the last," and I felt something burst inside me, a memory maybe, or a soul, and I saw, really saw, what the house was, not a building but a body. Not haunted but alive, not cursed but hungry, and every owner before me was still here, and the walls, and the floor, and the dark, all part of the great nesting thing that lives below and between, and I was home, not trapped, not possessed, but welcomed. And I understood now why the dreams came, why the voices whispered, why my blood turned cold at dusk, because I wasn't just a man in a haunted house, I was bait. I was the next seed in a garden of flesh and rot, and I belonged to the house now, too. The mouth beneath the stairs, to the black door that never really needed a key, And as I speak these words, as you read them, you too have opened something, something watching you now from behind your screen, something that waits for your breath to hitch, for your eyes to blink, for your mind to slip just far enough that it can reach through. Because the house isn't a place, it's a hunger that spreads with every story told, every word read, every door left ajar, and now it knows you too. Story 12. I never wanted to tell this story, not because I was afraid you wouldn't believe me, but because I'm afraid that if I say it out loud, really let the words form and become real again, then maybe whatever followed me out of that hospital will know where I am. Maybe it never forgot. Maybe it's still waiting, and maybe speaking its name is like touching a match to dry grass. Because I've learned that silence is sometimes the only way to stay safe. But silence has been eating me alive, so here it is, the truth, or at least what's left of it after all these years of trying to forget, to bury it under pills and therapy and hollow laughter. Because it started with my internship at the state-run psychiatric hospital. Not the nice kind with soft lights and coffee carts, but the crumbling relic kind, the kind that still had padded rooms and iron doors. The kind they built in the 1800s with windows too small for a person to fit through and tunnels beneath it that weren't on any blueprint. And I went in bright-eyed and eager, thinking I could help people, thinking this would look good on a resume, thinking I was stronger than I was. And it started normally enough, paper pushing, assisting in group therapy, sitting in on intake evaluations. But the longer I was there, the more I noticed something wrong. Not with the patients, but with the staff, how they avoided certain rooms, how they whispered about Ward G like it was cursed, how none of the doctors wanted to be assigned to it, and how, when a nurse had to go in, they would always mutter something under their breath before opening the door, like a prayer or a warning. And of course I was curious. Of course I asked questions, and of course no one gave me real answers. Just vague shrugs and stories about an incident that happened years ago, and I should have let it go. I should have taken the hint, but something about the way they acted, it was like they were afraid, not just cautious, but truly terrified. And the more they tried to keep it from me, the more I needed to know. So one night I stayed late, on purpose, volunteering for records duty. And when the hospital quieted down and the staff thinned out, I snuck into the archives, past the rusted lock that didn't even need a key anymore, and started digging. And what I found didn't make sense. Not at first, because there were files missing, patient numbers skipped entirely, whole weeks of notes blacked out or torn away. And in the back of one drawer I found a folder that wasn't labeled, just a date. October 14th, 1987. And inside were photos, horrible photos, of walls smeared with what I thought was blood, of a room ripped apart from the inside, of a face, or what had been a face, melted into the wall like wax pressed against a hot pipe, and beneath them, a single name. Patient 237, no first name, no diagnosis, just a note that said, "Do not engage. Do not speak. Do not open the door." And I remember laughing, because it felt like a joke, some old prank played on new hires. But the air around the file cabinet had gone cold, like the heat had been sucked out of the walls. And when I closed the folder, I could have sworn I heard breathing behind me. Slow, wet, gurgling breathing. And when I turned, there was no one there. But the door to the hallway had closed on its own. And the lights above me flickered once, twice, and then held steady. And I told myself I imagined it, that I was just tired. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, like the building had noticed me now, like something deep inside it had opened an eye. And after that night things got worse, fast, because I started seeing someone in the hallway. A man, tall, impossibly tall, with skin stretched too tight across a skull that didn't fit, and eyes, or what should have been eyes, just deep holes that dripped black. And every time I blinked, he was gone, like a shadow. Too quick to catch, but I knew he was real. I felt him in my chest like static, and every night he came closer, first at the end of the hallway, then near the elevator, then just outside the break room window. And I tried to quit. I handed in my badge and told them I couldn't stay, But the head psychiatrist just looked at me, dead in the eyes, and said, "It's already inside you, isn't it?" And I didn't know what to say, because I'd been having dreams, awful dreams, about a door in the basement that wouldn't stay shut, a door that pulsed like a wound, and voices behind it whispering in a language I didn't know but somehow understood. And in the dreams I opened the door. I always opened the door, and behind it was nothing, true nothing, not dark, not space, just absence, just cold that hated. And I'd wake up with blood in my mouth and fingernails broken, and sometimes claw marks down my arms like I'd tried to pull something out of myself. And the worst part was the mirror, because my reflection would lag behind me, just a little, just enough to make me doubt, to make me wonder if it was still me on the other side. And one day, on instinct, I threw a chair at it, and it didn't shatter. It rippled, like water, like the glass wasn't solid anymore. And I ran out of that place and didn't stop until I was 3 states away. But the dreams followed, the shadow followed, and I started seeing signs, markings, glyphs I'd never learned but could read, etched into sidewalks, drawn in condensation on bus windows, scratched into the bark of trees outside my new apartment. Always the same pattern, always pointing west, and I don't know why I did it, why I followed. Maybe I thought if I found it, if I finished what started back there, it would stop, but it didn't. It just got worse, because whatever it is, patient 237, the shadow, the door, it doesn't stay in one place. It rides people like parasites, wears them like skin, and now I see it in others too, in the way. Someone blinks too slow, or smiles too wide, or speaks with an echo no one else hears. And I know it's still coming for me. I know I never left that hospital. Not really. I think maybe I died there, and this is what it's like to be remembered by something that shouldn't exist. And every day it gets closer. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back in that room, the one behind the door, and I can feel it breathing through me. Not around me, but through me. Like we share lungs now, like my body is just a waiting place. And I'm writing this not to be saved, not to be believed, but to warn you, because if you see the man with the hollow eyes, don't look at him, don't speak to him. And for the love of God, don't follow him if he turns and walks away, because that's how it gets in. That's how the door finds new keys to turn, and you don't want to know what waits on the other side. Story 13. I never talked about what happened to me during those 6 nights alone in the house on Wren Hollow Road, not because I was afraid people would laugh or call me insane, though they would, and some did, but because I still don't know if saying the words out loud gives it power again, or if writing it down is the final nail in the box that keeps the thing from crawling back into my head. But I have to tell it. I have to purge it somehow because it's in me still. Sleeping maybe, watching maybe, and if I don't bleed the memory out onto paper, I'll end up like the others, like the neighbors who moved away without a word, like the old man who burned his eyes out with lie, like the girl who walked backward into the woods one night humming that cursed lullaby with her face pressed to a mirror she wouldn't stop licking. Because this started the year my sister disappeared, not the day of, but the weeks that followed when everything went silent. When her bedroom smelled like mildew and the corners of the walls looked a little too dark no matter how much light I turned on. And I was only 13 and too stupid to understand that grief doesn't whisper, it howls in strange voices late at night. And back then I thought maybe if I stayed in her room long enough, maybe if I listened to her tapes or wore her clothes or lay perfectly still on her bed in the shape she left in the sheets, I could bring her back or at least hear her laugh again. But what I heard wasn't laughing, and it wasn't her voice, at least not all the way, because something had changed in that room, and I think whatever took her left something behind, something hungry. And the first time I heard it was after 3 nights of not sleeping, just lying there staring at the ceiling while the fan clicked like it was chewing something. And I heard a voice say my name, not shout it, not whisper it, but say it in a way that made my muscles stiffen like I'd just been caught stealing. And I sat up thinking it was Mom or Dad, but it wasn't. They were already asleep. I could hear them breathing slow and steady like corpses behind their locked door. And when I turned toward the closet, I saw it open just a crack, and I swear on every bone in my body something ducked back into the dark. Something tall and slow and crooked, like it had too many elbows and not enough skin. And I know now that was the first night it tested me, to see how far it could go, because the next day all the mirrors in the house turned cloudy, like steam but cold, and I saw things in them that weren't me, reflections that moved slower or smiled too long or had mouths that didn't stop opening even when mine did. And I told Mom, but she slapped me, told me not to joke about my sister being in the glass. But I hadn't said anything about that, not out loud, and that's when I knew she'd heard it too and was just trying to kill it with silence. But you can't starve a thing that feeds on the absence of sound, and the house started to rot in quiet ways. Doors locked from the inside with no key, drawers filled with wet hair, the floorboards thumping at night like something was crawling under them. And when I tried to sleep, it waited until the line between dream and waking blurred like a smudge on a lens, and it would come. It would peel the air open like paper and crawl into my ears and whisper things like, "She's not dead, just folded," or "Your skin would fit better if it was inside out," and I'd wake up bleeding from my nose or with my fingers bent backwards like someone had tried to turn me into something else. And I stopped going to school, stopped eating, stopped doing anything but sitting in the hallway with my back to the wall because it was the only place I could see every door at once. And that's when I noticed the drawings, the one scratched into the wallpaper with something sharp, spirals and eyes and hands too long and mouths too wide and numbers that didn't add up to anything but made me feel sick if I looked too long. And that's when the knocking started, slow at first, like a polite visitor at the front door, but then faster and deeper until the whole wall shuddered like a heart being pounded on from the inside. And I opened the front door once, just once, and found a pile of dirt shaped like a child with a dead bird in its chest and teeth made of glass. And behind it, standing under the crooked tree in our yard, was something that looked like my sister but wasn't, not really, because it was too thin. And her head tilted too far, and her mouth was a red hole that never closed. And when I blinked, she was gone, but the bird was still there, and it was still breathing even though it was cut in half. And that night the house didn't just creak. It groaned like it hated holding itself together, like it wanted to fall apart and let the thing inside crawl out. And I ran. I ran to the basement even though Mom always said not to. And I locked the door and I sat in the dark and I cried because I could. Hear it upstairs talking to my parents in my voice, laughing in my voice, crying in my voice. And when I finally came back up the next morning, they were gone. And all that was left was a trail of water leading into the kitchen where every faucet was running and the fridge was filled with teeth. And the lights wouldn't turn on anymore, but the shadows would. And they stretched in ways that didn't match the furniture. And the TV turned on by itself and played footage of my sister staring at me through the screen. And she said my name and smiled and then screamed for 12 minutes without blinking. And then I was alone, completely alone, except I wasn't, because I could hear something breathing under the house, under the floor, inside the walls. And it started to copy me, badly at first, like a puppet that didn't know how joints worked. But each day it got better, smoother, more like me, until I caught it staring at me from the mirror, and it didn't move when I did, and I screamed and punched the glass, and it smiled and put its hand on the inside of the crack. And then the police came, finally, because someone had called about the smell, and they found me in the attic surrounded by feathers and symbols and a dress I don't remember putting on. And they took me away, said I was sick, said I was traumatized, said none of it was real, but they didn't see the footage. They didn't hear the lullaby playing from the unplugged radio or see the little pile of bones in the fireplace, arranged like a praying child. And I spent years in therapy, years on pills, years trying to convince myself I was crazy. But I'm not. I wasn't. Because last week I got a package, no return address, just a note that said, "You left the door open." And inside was a Polaroid of my family sitting at the dinner table with their skin draped over chairs like coats. And behind them, in the window, was me, or what looked like me, smiling wide and staring at the camera with eyes I haven't seen since the night I burned that house down and promised I'd never look back. Story 14. It's hard to explain how it began or what exactly it was that made me feel like I had stepped out of the world I understood and into something that had been waiting for me since before I was born. But I know the exact moment I realized my life wasn't mine anymore came on a cold November morning in 2008 when I woke up in my apartment and saw a version of myself standing at the foot of my bed, just watching me with a face that looked almost right except the eyes were wrong and the mouth was twitching like it was struggling to remember how to smile, and I couldn't scream or move or even blink, and I lay there in silence for what felt like hours until it leaned in slowly and whispered in my own voice, but rasped like it was speaking through dry leaves, and said, "You were never supposed to notice." And then it was gone like it had never been there at all. But something changed in me after that, something irreversible. Because from that day forward, I started seeing cracks in the world like glitches in a video game or tears in wallpaper revealing something black and wet underneath. And it wasn't just in my home, but everywhere I went. The subway, the grocery store, my office. Subtle things at first, like a coworker whose name I knew suddenly acting like we'd never met, or a bus route that led to a part of the city that didn't exist on any map. And when I asked people about it, they'd tilt their heads like broken toys and smile too hard and say, "You must be thinking of somewhere else." But I wasn't. I knew what I saw, and it was getting worse. Like the world was unraveling around me thread by thread, and only I could see it. And for a while I thought I was just losing my mind, and I begged my doctor for sleep medication because I hadn't had a dream in weeks, and the shadows in my room were starting to move on their own and repeat things I hadn't said out loud. But the pills didn't help because they didn't stop the voices. They only made them clearer, and they told me things I shouldn't know, like how my mother had once tried to drown me when I was a baby and buried the memory in prayer, or how my upstairs neighbor had been dead for 3 weeks, even though I still heard her walking around every night and crying through the vents. And I started to test reality. Little things like writing messages to myself and hiding them in books, or whispering nonsense phrases to see if I'd hear them echoed back by strangers on the street. And they were. Oh God, they were. I'd hear. "The bone behind your eye," whispered by the barista who never looked up, or "There are more doors than walls," hissed by a child dragging a stuffed rabbit across the bus floor. And I became obsessed with patterns, the way everything started looping. Certain faces repeating in crowds, clocks that always read 3:33, bruises appearing in the same place every night like someone was grabbing my ankle in my sleep. And eventually, I stopped leaving the apartment except when I had to, and even then I'd see things crawling just beneath the surface of glass and puddles and reflective metal, like something watching me from the underside of reality. And then the calls began. Blank numbers, always around the same time, always static or breathing, and once just the sound of my own voice saying, "Don't let it in," before cutting off. And I tried recording myself while I slept, and the footage showed me standing in the corner facing the wall for hours and whispering in a language I couldn't understand, and I don't remember doing it. I swear I don't. But it kept happening, and one night I watched the footage live, and I saw myself walk to the camera and stare into it and smile and say, "This isn't for you," before shutting it off. And when I turned around, I was still in bed, frozen, sweating, shaking, and I knew then that something had gotten in, some version of me or shadow of me or memory of something that never had a body until I saw it. And after that I stopped recording, stopped checking mirrors, stopped answering phones, and still it got worse. The walls began to breathe when I wasn't looking. Paintings changed slightly every time I blinked. The faces warped like they were being pulled from the inside. And I knew I couldn't stay in that apartment anymore. So I packed a bag and left in the middle of the night with no destination. Just an urge, an animal panic driving me into the cold. And I walked until I couldn't feel my feet, and I found myself at the edge of a field I'd never seen before, even though I'd lived in that city for 10 years. And in the middle of the field was a house, an old, rotting thing with windows like blind eyes and a roof that sagged like it was tired of keeping secrets. And I should have turned around. I should have run. But something in me said this was where I had to go. Like all the cracks had led here. All the voices had prepared me for this moment. So I went inside, and the house swallowed the sound behind me, and the door locked without a key. And Every surface inside was covered in handprints like people had tried to crawl out through the walls, and in the center of the room was a mirror taller than me and made of something that shimmered like water, and I saw myself in it. Not as I was, but as I should have been, with clear eyes and steady hands and no fear in my face. And I reached out without thinking and touched the glass, and it didn't feel cold or solid. It felt like skin, warm and pulsing and eager. And then everything went dark and I woke up 3 days later in my old bed. But something was wrong. Everything was wrong. Because the air was too still and the silence was too thick and my reflection wouldn't meet my eyes, and I realized the thing I saw in the mirror wasn't me. It was the version that had always been waiting to replace me. And now I don't know if I ever left that house or if I'm still standing in front of that mirror while this thing walks around in my skin, living my life, saying all the right things and smiling at all the right times while I rot behind its eyes. And sometimes, when the lights flicker or the radio static sharpens, I can almost feel my hands again, almost move my mouth, almost scream through its smile, but not enough, never enough, because I think this is the truth. It never wanted the world. It just wanted one life, one name, one voice, and I was too weak to stop it. Story 15. I don't know how long I can keep pretending everything is normal, but I'm writing this now because I think it's getting closer again, because the scratching has started in the walls and the lights have started flickering the way they did before, and because I need someone, anyone, to know that what happened to me in the autumn of 2015 wasn't a dream or a breakdown or a hallucination. It was real, all of it. Every single second of it etched into the back of my skull like burn marks. And I haven't slept right since, haven't looked in a mirror without flinching since, haven't turned off all the lights in my apartment even once because I know better now. I know what hides in the dark. I know what follows silence. And I know that sometimes when something finds you and you survive it, that doesn't mean it ever leaves. And it all started with a smell, this bitter, chemical, rotting meat kind of smell that came out of the heating vents in my old apartment right around the time the woman upstairs vanished without a trace. And everyone thought she just moved out overnight because her lease was up, but her plants were still in the windows, and her cat kept crying behind the door, and her mail kept piling up. And I told the landlord something was wrong, that we should call the cops. But he shrugged it off like people just leave, like it's normal to disappear without taking your wallet or your shoes or your damn keys. But I felt it in my gut. Something was wrong. Something was off. And then the noises started. The thumping at night. The creaking footsteps overhead, even though her unit was supposed to be empty. The dragging sounds like furniture being pushed across the floor. And once, I swear to God, I heard a voice saying something that didn't sound like words, more like syllables arranged in a pattern that made my nose bleed when I tried to write them down later, and I started staying up later and later, drinking coffee until my hands shook, watching the ceiling, for shadows that shouldn't be there. And then I found the hole, this tiny, perfect hole drilled through the ceiling in my bedroom, directly over my bed, just big enough to fit a finger. And something about it made me feel sick, made my throat dry up, made my skin crawl because I couldn't stop imagining something watching me through it, breathing through it, waiting for me to fall asleep so it could slide something thin and wet through that hole and into my ear or mouth or eye. And I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself it was just stress or maybe mold or maybe grief over my brother, who had died earlier that year in a freak accident, burned alive in a car that wouldn't unlock. And I thought maybe I was unraveling a little, maybe losing time, because I'd find objects in places I didn't leave them, my toothbrush in the freezer, my phone in the bathtub, my shoes lined up neatly outside the front door facing inward, like I had come home and taken them off, but I had no memory of leaving. And I started seeing things, little things at first, reflections that didn't match my movements, shadows that moved after I stopped walking, doors that were closed when I turned around, but open again the second I looked back. And my dreams were the worst part. These endless halls made of wet carpet and flesh-colored walls, humming with fluorescent lights that never buzzed the same way twice. And I'd walk forever in those dreams, barefoot and shivering, chased by the sound of something. Crawling, too fast and too quiet to be human. And then one night, I woke up with scratches all over my back, perfectly parallel lines like claws or long fingers, and blood on my sheets that didn't smell right, like copper mixed with bleach, and the smell was back in the vents stronger than ever. And I snapped. I packed a bag and left, moved into a hotel, quit my job, cut off my friends, spent weeks searching for anything that made sense, digging into disappearances, online forums, urban legends, obscure Reddit threads full of people talking about seeing the wrong version of themselves in reflections, about how the air starts to taste like metal before it happens, how static starts to follow you from screen to screen, and how the door opens when your sense of self is weakest. And I was reading one of those threads when every light in the room blew out at once, and in the silence that followed, I heard something breathe behind me, deep and rattling and wet, and I turned around and saw myself, but not quite myself, taller, thinner, skin too tight on the bones, smile too wide and eyes full of stars, and it didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe again. Just looked at me with this horrible kindness like it was trying to decide if I was worth the effort. And then it whispered, "Not yet," and vanished, just blinked out like static cutting off. And after that, things started to spiral faster. My reflection began to lag behind my movements like a broken video feed. I'd hear footsteps matching mine exactly, even when I was barefoot on carpet. And I'd get these flashes, these images in my head of me doing things I hadn't done, standing over a sleeping woman with a knife, pulling out my own teeth one by one, stepping into traffic with my arms open like I was welcoming something. And I knew it wasn't just me seeing this, because my neighbors started acting strange, crossing the street when I approached, whispering things under their breath like, "He's not alone," and "Don't look it in the eyes." And one day I came home and found all my mirrors broken, not shattered, but melted, like someone had taken a blowtorch to the glass and let it drip onto the floor, and scratched into the wall behind one of them was a sentence in what looked like my handwriting. "You brought it through." And I don't remember writing that. I don't remember anything between leaving work and arriving home. And I started blacking out more often, losing hours, then entire nights, waking up with dirt under my nails and the taste of ashes in my mouth. And I tried to get help. I checked myself into a clinic, told them I was afraid of hurting myself, of hurting someone else, and they locked me in a padded room, and everything was calm for a day or two, until the camera in the corner of the ceiling began to glitch, flashing static for a second every few minutes. And when it did, the walls would get closer, the room would darken, and I'd feel a presence coiling in the corners like smoke. With fingers, and the doctor said I was delusional, said I was traumatized, prescribed pills that only made me see it more clearly, like they'd sharpened my senses instead of dulling them. And I saw through the nurses, saw their faces peeling at the edges like paper, saw things behind their eyes staring out like prisoners in meat suits. And I knew I had to leave, so I did. I waited for the shift change, slipped through a fire door, and ran for as long as my legs would carry me. And now I live, like a ghost, moving every few weeks, never sleeping in the same bed twice, keeping the lights on, the mirrors covered, the TV playing static all night long so I won't hear it if it comes again. And I know it will, because I feel it every time I close my eyes, every time I think about that smell, that voice, that version of me that waits patiently on the other side of whatever thin, rotting skin separates this world from whatever hell I looked into. And I know this story sounds crazy, I know. None of this makes sense, but if you've seen the cracks too, if you've heard your own voice say something you didn't mean, if your reflection looks at you just a little too long after you turn away, then believe me when I say this isn't over. This isn't a story with a clean ending, because it never wanted to kill me. It wanted to wear me, to become me, and I think it's still trying. And if I disappear, if you see someone who looks like me walking down the street, or standing in your doorway, or smiling from a crowd, Don't let it in. Story 16. It began with the noises in the walls, the slow, deliberate scratching like fingernails or claws dragging lightly just behind the drywall, always starting at 3:12 a.m. exactly. Always moving from the ceiling above my bed to the baseboards behind the couch in the living room and then back again, in a perfect loop. And I told myself at first it was mice or raccoons or plumbing or settling pipes. But deep down I knew the difference because I could feel it, not just in the sound but in my bones, in my teeth, in my dreams which began twisting the same night the scratching started. Dreams where I floated through an endless maze of wet, rotting hallways with my name carved into the walls over and over again. Dreams where I woke up still inside them, gasping, covered in sweat and a thin dust I couldn't explain. And it wasn't just the noises, but the lights too, flickering in time with my heartbeat, sometimes dimming whenever I walked into a room like whatever was there didn't want to be seen. And then came the whispers, faint at first, like someone speaking through water behind closed doors, but they grew louder with each passing day, forming words I didn't understand, or maybe wasn't supposed to, phrases like, remember the black mouth, and he still wears your skin. And when I told my landlord, he brushed me off, told me the last tenant complained of the same thing and left in the middle of the night without a word, left food on the stove, a full ashtray still smoldering, and a message on the mirror that just said, don't answer, which didn't make sense until my phone started ringing every night at the same time, always from unknown numbers, always with the same static-filled silence until eventually I began hearing breathing. And then my own voice asking, why did you come back? And when I stopped answering, it started leaving voicemails, long, breathy recordings where I could hear myself screaming, but I never remembered doing it. And that's when I started locking. Every door, even the closets, even the kitchen cabinets, even the bedroom from the inside. But it didn't matter because things kept moving when I slept. Picture frames flipped around, chairs facing the wrong direction. My toothbrush soaked in something sticky and dark, and then the dreams started bleeding into my waking life because I'd see flashes of that same hallway, those same walls, and my reflection, not behind me but inside me. As if I was hollow and something had crawled inside and made a nest. And one night I saw myself standing outside the apartment window from the 3rd floor up, just staring in with a face too long and eyes that shimmered like oil, and I couldn't scream, couldn't move, and when I finally blinked it was gone. But the next morning there were footprints on the windowsill, barefoot, human-sized, but with too many toes, and I know how insane this all sounds. I do. I went to a therapist. I went to 3, and all of them said trauma, all of them said sleep disorder, all of them said dissociation until the 3rd one called me in a panic at 2 a.m., crying, whispering that she saw me standing in her house, just standing there and smiling, and then she hung up and I never heard from her again. And I checked her office the next day, and it was emptied out like she'd never existed, no records, no sign she ever worked there. And I started to think maybe I had died and no one told me, that maybe I'd slipped through a crack in the world and now I was where the broken things went, and the only reason I was still breathing was because it wasn't done with me yet. Because sometimes I'd wake up with soil under my fingernails and bruises shaped like teeth along my ribs and writing on my arms in languages that aren't real but still make my ears ring when I read them, and I don't leave the apartment anymore. Not really. I try, but the streets look wrong now, stretched, fake, like a dream that forgot how buildings are supposed to look, and people pass me and whisper things I can't hear with mouths that don't move, and I see signs in windows that say you're not him, and he never left, and run, run, run. And I stopped watching TV because the news anchor started speaking directly to me in that same voice from the phone, and when I unplugged it, the screen stayed on for 12 minutes, just static, and that face slowly emerging from the blur, not mine, but almost, like it was trying to remember how to be me. And I started hearing it in the plumbing, in the fridge hum, in the white noise machine I bought to drown it out, a rhythm, like a heartbeat but backwards. And I realized one night that it matched the knocking, the slow thud 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 I'd started hearing from under the floorboards. And I know that sounds like a cliche, I know how it sounds, but I pulled them up with a crowbar one night. I lost it and ripped them up, and beneath the boards was just more boards, but wet. And beneath those were bones, not buried but arranged in a spiral, all pointing inward to a single empty space exactly the length of my body, and I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I just stared at it for hours until my eyes bled. And when I looked away, I was no longer alone in the room. I could feel it beside me, not touching me but through me, like it had always been there, just under the surface of my skin, waiting for me to open the floor, to remember what I was, what I am. And I blacked out then, I think. Because when I came to, it was morning. The floorboards were back in place, the room clean, my hands smooth and pink like they'd just been burned. And I knew then what it wanted. It wasn't to kill me, it was to be me, to wear me, to stretch itself into my shape like a costume. And now I don't trust anything. Not the mirror, not photographs, not even my voice. Because sometimes I hear it echo wrong. Sometimes I feel my mouth move when I didn't speak. And every now and then I see myself, just for a second, from behind, walking into the next room before I do. And I know one day I'll wake up and it'll be the one in my bed. And I'll be the one behind the wall, scratching, begging, forgotten, watching from the cracks I used to ignore. Story 17. It started the day I found the Polaroid tucked into the crack behind the medicine cabinet in my grandmother's old farmhouse, the one we were cleaning out after she passed away, and I almost didn't notice it because it was yellowed and curled at the edges, but something about it made me stop. Maybe it was the way it was so carefully wedged in place like it had been hidden there on purpose, or maybe it was the way the air felt colder the second I touched it, but I pulled it out and saw it was a photo of me. Not as a child, but as I was right then, in that moment, standing in the upstairs hallway with the bathroom door behind me and the same shirt I was wearing and the same exact expression on my face. And I remember just staring at it in silence while the house creaked and moaned around me like it was breathing. And I felt this tightness in my chest like being watched too closely, like something had leaned over my shoulder and exhaled down my neck. And I dropped the photo, but I couldn't leave it. I had to pick it up again, even though touching it made the skin on my hand ache like it had been dipped in cold oil. And I showed it to my sister, who was downstairs packing boxes, and she just laughed nervously and said it must have been some kind of weird prank, maybe an old relative who liked photography and staged creepy shots. But neither of us could explain how my face, clothes, and expression were identical to what I looked like at that exact second. And later that night, when I tried to sleep in the old guest bedroom, I kept hearing things move in the hall. Not footsteps exactly, but the dragging of something soft and slow, like a sack of wet cloth being pulled along the floorboards. And when I finally gathered the courage to check, there was nothing there. Just the hallway lit by a single weak bulb, and the Polaroid lying in the middle of the floor again, even though I'd locked it in my suitcase hours earlier. And I started having dreams that week, vivid and ugly dreams where I was standing in the corner of a room made of mirrors that didn't reflect anything properly. And I'd look at myself and see a version of me with its mouth sewn shut and black stuff dripping from the seams, always reaching out for me with hands that looked like mine, but were just a little too long. And it got worse when we brought the boxes back home to my apartment in the city, because suddenly I was losing time, waking up in the kitchen with no memory of getting out of bed, finding drawers open, and every mirror turned to face the wall, sticky fingerprints on the window glass like someone had been pressing their face against it from the outside 6 stories up. And the Polaroid was always nearby, always showing up again in my wallet, on the TV stand, under my pillow, and the image started changing too, subtly at first. The background behind me grew darker. The figure in the reflection of the bathroom mirror became clearer, more distinct, and it wasn't me anymore. It was something with my skin, but not my shape, a stretched and wrong version of me that kept getting closer with every new photo. And I tried to burn it, but the flames just curled around it like it was made of glass. And I tried to throw it away, but it would be back by morning. And I even mailed it to a stranger across the country, but the envelope came back torn open with a note inside that said, "You can't give it away once it knows your face," written in handwriting that looked exactly like mine. And I stopped sleeping. I stopped talking to people. I stopped leaving my apartment because every time I looked into a reflective surface, I saw it now, right behind me, smiling with no teeth, and I heard things at night, tapping on the windows, humming in a voice like mine but reversed, and sometimes I'd catch myself whispering things I didn't understand, languages I'd never learned, syllables that made my ears ring and my teeth feel loose. And I called a priest, I called a medium, I even called a paranormal investigator who told me, after 5 minutes in my apartment, that whatever I'd brought home from that farmhouse wasn't attached to the photo. It was attached to me, and it had been waiting a long time, maybe my whole life, for me to open the door, to bring it into a place where it could finish what it started. And then he left and didn't answer his phone again. And the next night, I found another photo. This one showing me sleeping in my bed with the figure curled up at my feet like a dog made of shadows. And the face on it was starting to look more human, more like mine. And I started to understand that it wasn't trying to haunt me. It was trying to replace me, to slide into my life and wear my skin like a costume. And I wondered how long I had before people stopped noticing the difference, before my voice stopped sounding like mine, before the thing in the mirror started moving before I did. And I tried to destroy every trace of myself, burned all my photos, erased all my social media, stopped answering my phone. But it didn't help. It only made it more aggressive, more hungry. And then the dreams became something else entirely. No longer just nightmares, but places I woke up in, rooms that were too still, with air that smelled like rotting flowers and walls that pulsed like veins. And I would wake up screaming, only to find myself already standing in the hallway, Polaroid in hand, staring at a door that didn't exist before, a door painted blackened, covered in tiny fingernail scratches like hundreds of hands had tried to claw their way out from behind it. And I don't know how long I can keep holding on, because I'm forgetting things now, my birthday, my parents' names, the feel of my own handwriting, and the reflection moves more confidently than I do, like it's rehearsed this 1,000 times, and I'm just a tired actor waiting for the curtain to fall. And last night, I finally opened the door, the black door in the hallway that wasn't supposed to be there. And inside was a room that looked exactly like mine, but older, grayer, full of dust and silence and the smell of earth. And on the bed was a Polaroid camera, just sitting there, humming softly like a mouth breathing. And I knew I shouldn't touch it, but my hands moved on their own, and the moment I picked it up, it took a photo on its own, with no flash. And when I pulled it out, the picture showed me staring into the lens. Except my eyes were completely black and my mouth was stretched into a grin that split my cheeks open like paper. And when I looked up from the photo, I saw myself standing in the doorway, not holding the camera anymore, but staring with that same empty expression. And now I don't know if I ever walked out of that room, or if I'm still there, or if the thing that returned to my apartment afterward is me, or just a shadow that wears my voice, types my words, and pretends to be afraid while it waits for the next person to find the photo and let it. And again, story 18. It all started the night I came back from my shift at the diner and found the apartment door cracked open, even though I clearly remember locking it behind me that morning, and I stood there for a long time, just staring at the sliver of darkness beyond the door frame while my breath caught in my throat like a fist had closed around it. And I told myself someone must have broken in. Maybe a thief, maybe some desperate kid. But something in my gut told me not to step inside, something deep and primal, but I did it anyway, because it was my home, and because I had nowhere else to go, and because I refused to be afraid of my own space. And at first, nothing seemed out of place. Not really. The lights were off, the air was still, and everything looked exactly as I'd left it except for one small thing, the picture frame on the living room shelf. The one with the photo of me and my brother at the beach when we were kids was turned face down like someone didn't want to look at us. And that was strange because I never moved it, and I live alone, and my brother's been dead for 11 years, so I picked it up and set it back upright and told myself it must have fallen over, vibrations from the passing trains maybe. Even though I live on the 4th floor and the building doesn't shake. And I went into the kitchen, turned on the light, and the bulb flickered once before dying with a soft pop. So I opened the fridge for light and found the contents wrong, not gone, but replaced. The same labels and jars and Tupperware containers were there, but none of them looked like mine. All slightly altered, the milk the wrong brand, the leftovers in containers I didn't own, and I stood there gripping the fridge door while the motor hummed louder than usual. Like it was aware of me, like it was thinking. And then I heard the sound of something shifting in the bedroom, not loud, not obvious, just the gentle creak of a mattress under weight, and I told myself it was the neighbors. Paper-thin walls, maybe they were moving around in the next apartment over, except I know the couple next door were out of town visiting family for the week because I'd been watering their plants. And there was no one else on this floor who ever made that kind of sound. So I grabbed the broom because it was the only thing nearby and crept toward the bedroom, my heart hammering against my ribs, and I pushed open the door and found the room empty. Exactly as I'd left it, except the closet door was open, not fully, just enough to see darkness inside, and I never leave the closet open, ever, not since I was a kid and used to have night terrors about eyes staring out at me from inside the slats, and I stood there for a long time, just watching that thin line of shadow, and then I walked up and yanked the door open and found nothing, just clothes and hangers and boxes, all exactly where they should be, and I felt stupid and relieved and tense all at once. So I shut the door, locked it, checked the windows, double-checked the front door, and then went to bed, but I didn't sleep, not really, just lay there with my eyes open in the dark, listening, and at 3:17 a.m., I heard my own voice call my name from the hallway, not loud, not urgent, just conversational, like someone trying to get my attention. And I sat up so fast I knocked the lamp off the nightstand, and then there was silence again, thick and absolute. And I told myself it was a dream, stress, sleep deprivation, maybe even some weird memory echo, but I knew what I'd heard. And the next morning when I got up, the photo frame was face down again, and my reflection in the bathroom mirror blinked a moment too late when I turned away, and the water from the faucet ran black for 3 seconds before going clear again. And every time I turned a corner in my own home, I felt like I was about to bump into something that had just stepped out of view. And things kept moving, little things, keys, socks, a book I'd left open and found closed and placed neatly on the shelf, and it felt less like something was haunting the space and more like something was learning it, studying me, getting better at, pretending nothing was wrong. And I tried calling friends, family, anyone, but my phone started glitching, freezing mid-dial, playing voicemails I hadn't listened to in years, one from my brother dated the night before he died in the crash that just said, "You're next." And when I tried to delete it, the phone screen cracked and bled static into my ears for hours, and I stopped going to work, stopped answering the door, stopped trusting my own voice because it echoed even when I wasn't speaking. And the reflection grew bolder, sometimes smiling when I wasn't, sometimes mouthing words I didn't know, sometimes just standing still even when I moved. And I realized this thing wasn't just watching me, it was becoming me or replacing me. Or maybe it always had been me, and I was just now noticing. And one night I found the bedroom door locked from the inside while I was on the outside, and when I finally got it open, I saw myself sleeping in the bed, body curled in the exact position I used to sleep in as a kid. And I backed away slowly and shut the door and spent the night sitting in the hallway staring at it, not daring to move, not daring to blink. And when morning came, the bed was empty again, but the sheets were still warm, and the mirror fogged up as if someone had just breathed on it. And when I went to the police, they looked at me like I was crazy. They searched the place, found nothing, but the cop who checked the bathroom asked if I'd recently remodeled, said something about the walls being older than they should be, like the room was built inside something else. And when I asked what he meant, he just shook his head and left without another word. And since then I've tried everything, burning sage, salt lines, prayers, therapy, even sleeping in motels. But the thing always follows, always finds me, always waits until just before sleep to remind me it's still here. And now there are times I wake up with bruises around my neck or scratches on my back that I couldn't have reached myself. And sometimes the face in the mirror has no eyes, just holes that stretch too wide, and my voice keeps breaking, glitching mid-sentence like a scratched record, and when I look in the reflection too long it starts moving on its own. And I swear to God I caught it blinking sideways once, like a lizard, and I don't know how much longer I can stay in this body, or how much longer I'm allowed to pretend it's still mine, because every photo I take now shows two of me. One always in the background, closer each time, and I don't sleep, I barely eat, and sometimes I catch myself saying things I don't understand, languages I've never learned, and last night I found a note in my handwriting taped to the fridge that said, "You're not supposed to be here," and I think I understand now. I think I was never meant to come back to this place, that whatever lived in the cracks of that door I left open that night didn't want a visitor, it wanted a vacancy, and now that I've been hollowed out, piece by piece, it's slipping into me like a hand into a glove, and I can feel myself forgetting the smell of rain, the taste of coffee, my mother's face, and soon I'll just be the reflection left behind. Blinking wrong in mirrors no one looks into anymore. Story 19. I never used to believe in anything I couldn't touch or explain or shove into a neat little box and label with logic and science and facts because I was raised by parents who were academics, the kind who rolled their eyes at ghost stories and treated anything paranormal as a symptom of emotional instability or childhood trauma left unresolved, and for most of my life I agreed with them. Laughed at people who talked about spirits and energies and demons and past lives. And it wasn't until the summer I spent house-sitting for a colleague of my father's in a quiet part of Massachusetts that I started to understand how flimsy the wall between belief and terror really is, how quickly something can dismantle every certainty you cling to. And it started small, barely even worth mentioning, like lights flickering or the sound of floorboards creaking in the middle of the night. But the place was old and large and had no central air, so I figured it was the house settling or the wind slipping through the warped wood. And I told myself those were normal things, the kind of things anyone would hear alone in a 3-story Victorian built before indoor plumbing was standard. But then I began noticing the mirror in the hallway outside my bedroom wasn't reflecting things correctly, like the angle was just a bit wrong or the lighting didn't match what was behind me. And once I walked by and saw what I thought was a person standing in the hallway behind me in the reflection, only to turn around and find nothing there. And that was when I started sleeping with the lights on, when I started avoiding the mirror altogether, brushing my teeth in the kitchen sink, closing my eyes when I walked past glass. And after a few days of this, my reflection stopped matching my movements entirely. And one night, I saw it staring at me even though I wasn't looking at the mirror, and I left the hallway light on after that. But things only got worse because every time I fell asleep, I would wake up, standing somewhere else in the house, not like I had wandered there in my sleep, but like I had been moved, placed, always barefoot and cold and shivering even in the middle of July. And sometimes I woke up facing walls or with my hands pressed against windows like I had been trying to leave or get in, or maybe both. And the worst time was when I found myself in the basement standing at the foot of a staircase that I didn't know existed, one that led even further down beneath the stone foundation, and it was pitch black and so cold I could see my breath. And I swear to you I heard something breathing down there, slow and steady like it was asleep, but dreaming of me. And I told myself it was a furnace or a raccoon or something else that didn't require me to scream or run or cry. But I couldn't go back down there. I couldn't even walk past the basement door after that without feeling like something was pressed up against the other side, listening to my footsteps, counting them, waiting for the pattern to change. And soon it wasn't just the reflection or the sleepwalking or the breathing or the sounds in the walls. It was my phone not working inside the house, even though there was perfect reception outside. It was the clocks all stopping at 3:33 a.m. for 3 nights in a row. It was the smell of something sweet and rotting that I could never find the source of no matter how hard I cleaned. And then the dreams began. The same one every time, where I was lying in the bed and something climbed up from beneath it and lay down next to me and whispered things in my ear in a language I didn't know but understood anyway. Words that tasted like ash and left my mouth dry and my tongue numb when I woke up. and I started keeping a journal because I thought maybe writing things down would help me see patterns or find rational explanations. But the entries began appearing in someone else's handwriting, looping and elegant and angry, always written in black ink I didn't own. And they would say things like, "You are in my house," or "You shouldn't have stayed past the first night," or "I am closer than your breath." And I began to see movement in the periphery, shapes behind doors that slammed before I could open them, figures at the edge of the woods that surrounded the property, always still and tall and wrong. And I tried to leave. I packed my bag and got in the car and drove until I reached the highway, but every exit led me back to the same road that led to the house, and I drove in circles for hours until the sky turned the color of bruises and I realized the sun hadn't risen at all that day. And when I got back, the front door was open, like it had been waiting, like it had known I'd return, and on the floor was a pile of photographs I had never taken, each one showing me asleep in a different part of the house. On the stairs, in the tub, standing in the corner of the attic with my face turned to the wall. And I stopped eating, stopped drinking, anything from the kitchen, because it all started tasting like blood, metallic and warm. And I stopped trusting the mirrors and the windows and my own voice, because sometimes I would hear it echo back from the wrong direction, and it wouldn't say the same thing I had just spoken. And the reflection began to smile even when I wasn't. And once I screamed into the glass, and it didn't even open its mouth, just watched me like I was some insect pinned beneath a slide. And on the last night, when I truly lost all sense of time or meaning, I woke up buried beneath the blankets, unable to move, the weight of 1,000 hands pressing down on my chest, and I heard my own voice whisper from above me, "It's better if you stop resisting." And I saw the ceiling breathe, pulse, drip something dark onto my face. And when I clawed my way free, there were marks around my ankles like fingers had been holding me in place. And I stumbled to the mirror and saw that my reflection no longer had my face, but something smoother, cleaner, something that looked like it had never blinked or cried or slept. And it moved before I did, tilting its head like it was studying a bug it had already decided to kill. And now that I've left, now that I'm back in my apartment hundreds of miles away, I know it came with me. I know it wasn't the house that was haunted but me, that I had opened something in that place I can never shut again. Because the reflection is still wrong, and sometimes I catch my own hands doing things I didn't tell them to do, like writing those symbols again, drawing them into the condensation on the bathroom mirror, or carving them into the wooden nightstand with a paperclip. And the dreams have followed me, and I wake up with that same sweet rot taste in my mouth. And last night my neighbor knocked on my door to ask if I was okay, because she heard someone crying through the walls. But I hadn't been crying. I hadn't even been awake. And she said it sounded like a child. And now I hear it too, every night, weeping from inside my closet, even though I don't own one anymore because I took the doors off. But somehow it's always there, and I don't know how much longer I can hold on to myself, because whatever it was that lived in that house, it's still with me. It's watching through my eyes, and I don't think it needs permission anymore. Story 20. I was a skeptic for most of my life, the kind of person who laughed at ghost stories and rolled my eyes when someone talked about feeling a presence or hearing whispers in the dark, because I needed proof, hard evidence. Not superstition or some half-remembered childhood nightmare. But all of that changed the year I moved into the old house on Dillinger Street. The one with the crooked chimney and the ivy-choked fence and the windows that always seemed to sweat no matter the season. And I didn't even want the house originally. It was inherited, left to me by an aunt I never met and rarely heard about. And I only moved in because my lease was ending, my job was remote, and the thought of owning property without a mortgage seemed too good to pass up. But from the moment I stepped through the front door, I felt it. This heavy silence that wasn't emptiness but the thick, expectant hush of a place that had been waiting, not vacant but watching. And the first week was just uncomfortable. Lights that flickered when I walked into rooms, my keys never where I left them, the smell of something faintly coppery in the hallway near the basement door. And I chalked it up to bad wiring and old pipes and nerves, told myself it was just the stress of change. until I started waking up every morning at exactly 4:12 a.m. with the sheets soaked in sweat and a metallic taste in my mouth like I'd bitten my tongue in my sleep. And when I checked the mirror, I started to notice that the face staring back at me didn't quite feel like mine. Not that it looked different, but the eyes were too still, the expression too delayed, like a badly synced video, and I tried to ignore it, tried to settle in, unpack, start fresh, but strange things kept happening. Things I couldn't explain away. A whisper that came from the attic even though it was sealed shut. A door that opened just an inch every time I passed it. The sound of footsteps in the room above mine despite there being no staircase to reach it. And I thought maybe I was going crazy. Maybe the loneliness was getting to me. So I started recording myself at night, just to prove to myself that nothing weird was happening. But when I played the audio back, there were long stretches where I could hear breathing that wasn't mine, soft and rasping and too close to the microphone, and once, clear as day, a voice whispering, "Don't look behind you," right before I jolted awake, and that was when I stopped sleeping with the lights off. When I started putting salt at the windowsills and sleeping with a knife under my pillow even though I didn't believe in anything it might protect me from. And things escalated fast after that. The basement door, which had always been locked, was suddenly open one morning, just a crack, and it stank like rot and iron and wet soil. And I went down with a flashlight because I had to, because not knowing was worse than finding something terrible, and I found dirt walls and the remains of something. Wooden, maybe a table or a bed frame, shattered and splintered and covered in deep gouges like claw marks. And something else, a mirror, half buried and cracked to the center, but it wasn't reflecting me, not exactly. It was reflecting the room as it was maybe 30 years ago. No dirt, no dust, no rot, just clean stone and tools on the walls and a man standing behind me, tall and shadowed and not moving, and I spun around, but of course there was no one there. And when I looked back, the mirror was blank, just a fractured pane of glass with no reflection at all. And I stumbled back up the stairs and nailed the door shut. But that night I heard something scratching from the other side, slow and deliberate like it was carving its way out. And the next morning the nails were on the floor and the door was swinging gently, like it had never been sealed at all. And I started hearing the voice during the day now, always behind me, always just out of sight, sometimes calling my name. Sometimes breathing my own words back at me with just the slightest difference in tone, like someone doing a cruel imitation. And the lights would flicker when I spoke out loud about what was happening, but stay steady when I stayed silent. And I began to wonder if silence was safer, if speech was an invitation, and I started seeing myself in places I hadn't been, my reflection waving when I wasn't, looking directly at me from windows on the second floor when I was standing on the ground, smiling from black screens that should have been off. And once I caught my phone camera recording me while I slept even though I hadn't touched it. And when I checked the video, I watched as something climbed out of the wall behind me, not a person, not even an animal. Just a shape, all wrong angles and too many limbs, moving like smoke with bones, and it leaned over me and whispered something into my ear before slipping back into the wall. And I couldn't hear the words, couldn't make out the sound, but I recognized my face twitching in response, like I understood in my sleep. And I stopped going outside after that. Started boarding the windows and unplugging the electronics and covering all the mirrors with sheets, but that didn't stop it. Didn't slow it down, because whatever it wasn't in the house, it was in me. It had been from the beginning, maybe longer than that. Maybe my aunt left me the house because she knew what was living inside it, because it needed someone new to carry it. And I stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped answering texts and emails and phone calls because every time I tried to communicate with someone outside, their replies came back wrong, like they'd been rewritten. Like the thing in me was learning how to imitate my life and slowly replacing it with something else. And now I don't know which thoughts are mine anymore. Don't know which memories are real, because I keep remembering things that never happened, rituals in the basement, names that aren't mine, nights spent digging in the walls for bones I never buried, and I've started speaking in my sleep, waking up mid-sentence in languages I don't know, writing symbols into the dust on the floorboards with my fingers without realizing. And I think the house is getting younger, the wallpaper brighter, the floors cleaner. Like the more I lose myself, the more it thrives. And I saw someone in the mirror yesterday. Not me, but not someone else either. A hybrid of both. And it spoke without moving its mouth and said, "Thank you for letting me in." And then I blinked and it was me again. But I know I didn't blink. I know I was watching the whole time. And I think the final part of me that's human is fading, slipping under. And when it's gone, no one will know. Because the thing will answer my emails, will smile in the photos, will mimic my voice perfectly, will laugh at the right jokes. And no one will ever know that I'm screaming silently from beneath the skin, that I'm trapped like a fossil in amber, conscious but powerless. And maybe that was the plan all along. Maybe the house was just the mouth and I was the meal, and now it's digesting me, slow and sweet and eternal, and every so often. In the rare moments I remember who I was, I write this story out, even though I know I'll delete it soon, or the thing will, or it'll change the words to something safe, something sane, something that makes you think this was just a story. Story 21. I never believed anything truly evil could happen in silence until the silence itself started whispering to me in the tiny apartment I moved into after my mother died and left me with nothing but an old key on a chain and a journal she'd written in a language I didn't recognize. And I only took the apartment because it was cheap and close to work, and I was tired of sleeping in my car and pretending I was just going through a phase. But from the first night, I felt like the air had teeth, like every breath I took was being measured and judged by something I couldn't see, but could feel in the way the light bulbs flickered when I cried, or how the shadows in the corners never aligned with the furniture, and how the pipes never made noise unless I was speaking out loud. And when I'd pause, they would go still as if listening, and when I started again, they would groan or shudder, or let out this high-pitched whine that made my fillings ache. And I told myself it was old construction and loneliness, and maybe a side effect of grief, but that theory died fast when I found the door. A narrow frame I swear wasn't there when I signed the lease, and didn't appear until my third week there, when I spilled red wine on the kitchen tile, and the liquid started running toward the far wall like the floor was slanted, except it wasn't. And the wine disappeared under what I thought was a baseboard, but turned out to be the edge of a tiny door no taller than my shin, hidden behind a warped wooden panel I had never noticed. And when I opened it, I didn't find a crawl space or wiring or insulation. I found stairs, too steep and too clean and too cold. And even though I didn't go down, not that time, I felt something come up, a pressure in the room that hadn't existed a second before, like something had turned to look at me and would keep looking until I acknowledged it. And from then on, I'd wake up with dirt under my fingernails and blood on my socks and dreams of whispers coming from behind my bathroom mirror, voices that sounded like mine but too fast and overlapping like they were echoing in advance. And the dreams began to blur with reality. So when I woke up to find the entire apartment filled with flies one morning, black fat bodies thudding against the ceiling and windows, I wasn't even sure if I was awake until one landed on my arm and bit me. Not stung, bit. With a row of tiny teeth I felt through my skin. And I screamed and threw open the window, and they poured out like smoke, leaving behind a smell I can only describe as sweet rot mixed with burnt hair. And after that, the mirrors stopped reflecting properly, always showing the room behind me darker than it was. And sometimes my reflection would blink slower than me or smile when I didn't. And eventually it stopped mimicking me altogether, just stood there, watching, moving its mouth like it was trying to tell me something I wasn't meant to understand. And then things got worse, much worse, because I found pages from my mother's journal in places I hadn't left them, pages stuffed under my pillow or taped to the fridge, covered in that same looping language that felt like it hummed when I looked at it too long. And once I heard a voice say a phrase from one of those pages while I was brushing my teeth, and when I looked up into the mirror, I saw someone else behind me, tall and pale and hairless, and wearing a suit made entirely of teeth, grinning with a mouth that went ear to collarbone, and I couldn't move until it winked at me and disappeared. And the next day, my reflection was missing entirely for 7 hours and returned only when I fell asleep on the couch and dreamed of being dissected alive by shadows who whispered, "You must understand before you return." And when I woke up, I had bruises shaped like fingers around my ribs, and my left pinky was dislocated even though I hadn't moved all night. And I tried to burn the journal, but the pages screamed, high and shrill like a thousand rats being crushed at once, and the flames died down before they touched the ink. And I started seeing people in the building I didn't recognize, pale silent neighbors who would stand in the hallway and stare at my door for hours. And when I opened it, they'd vanish. And once I left a note taped to my peephole saying, "I can see you," and the next morning it was still there. But the words had changed to "so can we." And one night, I woke up to the sound of every faucet in the apartment running, and when I checked, black water was pouring from the taps and filled the tub with something writhing just beneath the surface. And when I drained it, there was nothing inside but a small brass key that matched the shape of the pendant my mother had left me. And when I pressed it into the old metal box I'd found hidden in the wall behind the fridge, it clicked open to reveal a film reel labeled "Home." And even though I don't own a projector, I swear I saw flickering images dance across the walls that night. Scenes of my own childhood, but with wrong colors, red grass and blue sun, and everyone smiling just a little too wide. And my mother looking directly into the camera and saying things like, "You were never supposed to remember this, and the house chose you when I failed it, and it only needs one of us to live." And after that, I stopped using the lights, started living by candlelight because the bulbs began popping when I entered rooms, and the walls began to breathe, not metaphorically, but I could see the paint swell and retract in time with my heartbeats. And I noticed that the apartment wasn't the same layout it had been before. I could swear the bedroom door used to be on the left, not the right, and the kitchen now had Story 21. I never believed anything truly evil could happen in silence until the silence itself started whispering to me in the tiny apartment I moved into after my mother died, and left me with nothing but an old key on a chain and a journal she'd written in a language I didn't recognize. And I only took the apartment because it was cheap and close to work, and I was tired of sleeping in my car and pretending I was just going through a phase. But from the first night, I felt like the air had teeth, like every breath I took was being measured and judged by something I couldn't see, but could feel in the way the light bulbs flickered when I cried, or how the shadows in the corners never aligned with the furniture, and how the pipes never made noise unless I was speaking out loud. And when I'd pause, they would go still as if listening, and when I started again, they would groan or shudder or let out this high-pitched whine that made my fillings ache. And I told myself it was old construction and loneliness and maybe a side effect of grief, but that theory died fast when I found the door. A narrow frame I swear wasn't there when I signed the lease and didn't appear until my third week there, when I spilled red wine on the kitchen tile, and the liquid started running toward the far wall like the floor was slanted, except it wasn't. And the wine disappeared under what I thought was a baseboard, but turned out to be the edge of a tiny door no taller than my shin, hidden behind a warped wooden panel I had never noticed. And when I opened it, I didn't find a crawl space or wiring or insulation. I found stairs, too steep and too clean and too cold. And even though I didn't go down, not that time, I felt something come up, a pressure. Story 22. I used to believe I was just unlucky, that my life was nothing more than a series of unfortunate coincidences strung together by bad decisions and bad timing. But that belief began to crack the night I moved into the apartment on Crenshaw Street, a place I found after weeks of couch surfing and sleeping in my car, a place that seemed too cheap for what it offered. Second floor, large windows, newly renovated, and I should have known better when the landlord didn't ask for a deposit, didn't even have me sign a lease, just handed me the keys and said, "As long as you're quiet, we won't have a problem." And I moved in with nothing but a mattress and a box of clothes, and that first night I slept better than I had in months. But something about the silence felt thick, like a room holding its breath. And the next morning I woke up with bruises on my arms that looked like fingers, and I thought maybe I tossed and turned too hard. maybe I'd hit the wall in my sleep, but then I saw the scratches on the floor, long parallel lines near the foot of the bed, not the kind made by furniture or claws but by fingernails. And I told myself I must not have noticed them when I moved in, though something about the way they were etched into the wood, fresh and raw, made me feel like they hadn't been there the day before. And each night after that, the room felt heavier, not darker in a way you can measure with your eyes, but darker in weight, like the shadows were thicker, the air more humid, the space more crowded. And then came the dreams, or what I thought were dreams, because they never felt like my own, always from a third-person view, always in that same room, but not the way I lived in it. Always with someone else sleeping in my bed and someone standing over them, sometimes whispering, sometimes watching, sometimes reaching slowly like they were trying to remember how to touch. And each time I woke from these dreams, I'd find things misplaced, like the chair moved 2 feet from where I left it, or the closet door slightly ajar when I never used it, or a single spoon placed carefully on the windowsill. And I didn't think much of it until the morning I woke up and found a Polaroid of myself sleeping, placed directly on my chest. And I live alone, had no visitors, had no timer cameras, and my phone hadn't taken it. And the photo was angled from above like someone had stood on the bed and snapped it while I was unconscious. And the moment I saw it, I felt something crawled beneath my skin, not a metaphor, not anxiety, but the real, physical sense of something squirming under the surface of my body. And the bruises got darker, deeper, spreading down my spine like fingerprints. And I started sleeping with the light on, which only made the shadows longer, more stretched, more animated. And I tried to leave, but every time I packed a bag, something would go missing. The car keys, my shoes, the phone would be dead no matter how long it charged. And once I found my bags outside my door, packed neatly, untouched, and I hadn't moved them. And I stopped leaving the apartment entirely after I saw myself through the peephole, just standing there, facing the door, head tilted, not blinking, not breathing, just staring. And when I blinked, it was gone. And that night, I dreamed of walking barefoot down a hallway lined with doors, and each one opened as I passed, but inside was just more of me, dead, twisted, folded wrong, nailed to the ceiling, strung by intestines, stitched with wire and blinking slowly like they were still alive. And when I woke up, my feet were dirty, cut, bleeding, and the apartment smelled of copper and mold, and the mattress had been flipped, the wall scratched. And my own handwriting scrawled on the ceiling opened the floor, and I don't remember writing it, don't remember climbing up there, but something in me trembled because part of me believed it, and I pried up a corner of the floor near the bed and found, not insulation or wiring or beams, but a dark hollow space and stairs made of bone, thin, polished vertebrae stacked like ivory steps leading downward into a depth the building couldn't physically contain. And I felt something brush my cheek, not wind, not air, but breath. And a voice in the dark whispered, "We've been waiting to be remembered." And I screamed and nailed the boards shut, covered the floor in salt, in candles, in tape. But the steps still creaked at night, upward this time, and I started hearing humming through the vents, familiar melodies I hadn't heard since childhood, lullabies my mother never sang to me, but that I somehow knew anyway. And the reflection in the bathroom mirror stopped following me, started doing things I wasn't, mimicking emotions I didn't feel, showing tears when I was laughing, grinning when I cried, and the lights flickered only when I said my name out loud, like the apartment hated the idea of me remembering who I was. And I started seeing people in my dreams who talked backwards, in voices that dripped like honey over glass, and they told me that names had weight and mine had been worn too thin. And the next day, all my ID cards were blank. Every piece of mail just said current occupant. And my phone only showed my contact name as error. And I tried to call someone, anyone, but every voice on the line just laughed and laughed until I bled from the ears. And I screamed into the phone, and the voice screamed back in my own voice. And I threw it out the window, but it was back on the table the next morning, buzzing and vibrating nonstop with messages I couldn't read. Just symbols, long lines of eyes and spirals and teeth. And the fridge was always stocked no matter how empty I left it. But the food was wrong, fruit that bled when I bit into it, meat that twitched on the cutting board, milk that sang, and I stopped eating, stopped drinking, stopped sleeping. But the apartment never let me leave. The door locks changed. The windows grew bars, and every photo on the wall showed me in different times, different outfits, different deaths, and in every one I was smiling, wide, hollow, glass-eyed, and I heard knocking in the walls and whispers in the plumbing and sobbing under the floorboards. And once I crawled into the closet to hide and found myself already inside, staring at me, whispering, "We forgot how to die." And I knew I'd never be alone again, not truly, because whatever the apartment was, it didn't want a tenant. It wanted a vessel, a host, a shape to wear, and it wore me slowly, replaced my memories one by one, changed the color of my eyes, the way I walked, the thoughts I had, and now I can't remember how long I've lived here or if I ever lived anywhere else. Because when I look at old photos, they're all taken in this same room, and when I hear my name, I don't recognize it. And I think maybe I was never real to begin with, just a skin stitched around a screen, and maybe I'm the one who scratched the floor, who flipped the mattress, who took the photo, who hummed through the vents, and every time I blink I lose a little more. And one day I'll wake up and be someone new entirely, with a new face, a new voice, but still here, always here. In the apartment on Crenshaw Street, where the rent is cheap and the silence watches and no one ever moves out. Story 23. I never told anyone the truth about what happened in that house because I knew if I said it out loud it would follow me again, would find the hole in my voice and crawl through, would stretch itself thin across my words like skin over a frame. Because when I finally left the house on Hollowvale Drive, I thought I was free, thought I had escaped the sickness hiding in the walls, the way the floorboards whispered at night, and the pipes moaned in languages I couldn't understand but felt in my dreams, where the doors would open by themselves not because of a draft, but because something behind them had hands, thin and eager and cold like regret. And when I moved in, I was told it had been abandoned for 20 years, left untouched except by the wind and the dust and the insects that nested in the corners like watchful eyes. And I moved in because I had nowhere else to go, because I thought I could fix it up, flip it, make a little money and leave. But it wasn't the kind of house you fixed. It was the kind that fixed you, or broke you in such a specific shape that you'd never know you weren't yourself anymore. And it started small, like it always does, with the missing hours, the misplaced keys, the soft thud of something heavy dragging across the attic floor when I was sure I was alone, the cold spot at the base of the stairs that smelled like burnt sugar and old pennies. And I told myself houses creak, old wiring hums. Loneliness is a kind of fever that makes everything feel like it's watching. But then I found the room that wasn't on the floor plan, a narrow space behind the upstairs linen closet that didn't exist until it did, and inside was a mirror that didn't reflect me, not exactly it showed a version of me that never blinked, never moved when I did, only smiled slightly like it knew a joke I hadn't heard yet. And I covered it with a sheet, but the next morning the sheet was folded neatly at the foot of my bed, and the mirror was closer to the door. And when I finally tried to smash it, I found that it wasn't glass at all but water, rippling softly, and when I touched it my fingers went through, and I pulled them back covered in something thick and red that smelled like rust and roses. And that night I dreamed of the house swallowing me whole, room by room, wall by wall, like a snake unhinging its jaw. And I woke up with splinters in my teeth and plaster dust under my nails and no memory of leaving my bed, and I began hearing my name whispered from the basement, not shouted or cried but cooed, like a lullaby, like seduction. And I made the mistake of answering once, and the lights all went out at once and didn't return until dawn. And the furniture had all been turned upside down except the chair I had been sitting in, which had been moved into the exact center of the living room, and beneath it was a spiral drawn in chalk, made of words I couldn't read. And after that the house became colder no matter how high I turned the heat, and the windows began to fog from the outside, and something began writing on the glass with its finger. Things like "already here," and "skin is just clothing," and "who were you before?" And I stopped bringing people over after my friend Sarah came by and wouldn't stop staring at the ceiling. And when I asked what she was looking at, she said, "There's a girl up there, just above you. She has your eyes, but her mouth is wrong." And then she left without taking her coat, and I never saw her again. And I began to feel hungry for things that weren't food: dirt, paper, the wax of old candles, and I chewed them without knowing why until my gums bled and my teeth became loose. And one night I swallowed a spider that crawled out of the sink, and it whispered something in Latin as it went down, and I felt it settle in my stomach like a seed. And the next morning, I couldn't see my reflection in any mirror, and when I turned my phone camera on, it only showed static and shadows, and I would hear my own voice calling to me from closets and crawl spaces, always asking questions like, "Do you remember the red room?" and "Who taught you to bleed like that?" And the truth is I did remember. I remembered the red room that pulsed behind the mirror in the linen closet, the way it throbbed with something alive, and I remembered the figure standing in the center, tall and smooth and blank-faced with a mouth that opened sideways, whispering, "You were born in forgetting." And every time I opened a door in the house, I feared I would see it again, standing there, smiling, patient. And it got worse when I stopped sleeping, when the walls began to hum all night with that low vibration you can only hear through your bones. And the paintings I had put up all melted one morning into streaks of black and gray like ash soaked in tears, and I started waking up on the roof, barefoot, shivering, my clothes folded neatly beside me, and the stars above weren't stars anymore, they were eyes, unblinking, always open, and sometimes they wept when I looked at them too long, and I stopped counting the days because time didn't work right anymore. The clock spun too fast or not at all, and the house would grow or shrink when I wasn't looking, staircases too long, doors leading into themselves, and I once watched my own hand rot in real time before it snapped back into color like a film being rewound. And I knew the house was showing me things, or teaching me things, and I didn't know which was worse. And one day I found a second me sitting on the bed, thinner, sharper, all elbows and shadows, and they looked up and said, "You're almost ready." And when I tried to scream, they shoved their fist in my mouth and pulled out my voice, held it up like a fish and bit into it. And since then I haven't spoken, can't, not out loud, not even in my mind, because the house hears everything now, even thoughts, especially thoughts. And when I try to think about leaving, the hallway grows longer, the door more distant, and the knob melts when I touch it. And the worst part is I don't remember what my life was before the house, don't know where I lived or who I loved or what I looked like when I smiled without fear. And I found photos in the attic of a family that looked like me but not quite, mouths too wide, eyes too many, all dressed in clothes I own but don't remember buying. And I think I've always been here, that I was made by the house, birthed in its dark hollow heart. And everything else was a lie it let me wear to soften the fall. And now I hear them in the walls, the others, the old tenants, the nearly consumed, still whispering for help, still trying to crawl out through cracks in the plaster and knots in the wood, but they never leave, not really. They just get quiet, and I think soon it'll be my turn to quiet down, to dissolve into the house like sugar in tea, to become one more echo it feeds on. And I don't know if I'm still human, if I still have a name or a face or a soul, or if I ever did, but I do know this. If you hear of an old house on Hollowvale Drive with the windows that breathe and the door that always opens just a little too wide, do not enter, do not knock, do not even stop to look, because it sees you. And if it sees you, it remembers you, and once it remembers, it never lets go. Story 24. I know no one will believe me because even I barely believe myself anymore, and I've lived every second of it. But the truth is that something inside me changed after I pulled that thing from the water. That thing that didn't have eyes or bones or anything you'd recognize as belonging to a living thing, but still pulsed in my hands like a heart that hadn't forgotten how to beat. And I should have thrown it back into the river where I found it. Should have left it alone like my father told me to. But I was always too curious for my own good, and so I kept it, wrapped it in a cloth, and buried it behind the shed where it could whisper to me at night through my dreams. And at first I thought it was just my imagination, the voice, low and slow like thick syrup sliding down my spine, telling me secrets I never wanted to know, like how my mother really died, or what my brother buried in the field behind the old church, or how many spiders live in the average human skull. And soon I started to see things, shapes in the corners of rooms that bent the shadows wrong, faces in the wood grain of my bedroom door that changed expression every time I blinked, sometimes smiling, sometimes screaming, always watching, and I stopped sleeping because the dreams weren't dreams anymore. They were places, real places, deep places, cold and wet and filled with the sound of something ancient breathing beneath the ground, and I'd wake up with my hands covered in soil and my hair damp with river water, and sometimes I'd find fish bones in my pockets or dead leaves stuck to my tongue, and once I woke up with a small black stone sewn into my shoulder like a parasite trying to hatch, and I knew then that I had made a mistake. That what I pulled from the water wasn't just some dead animal or forgotten relic, but a piece of something bigger, something old and buried and waiting, and the voice got louder, sharper, angrier, telling me I owed it something, that it had chosen me, that my body was just a shell waiting to be filled, and I started losing time, hours at first, then days, sometimes entire weeks where I'd wake up in places I didn't recognize wearing clothes that weren't mine, with symbols carved into my arms and salt caked under my fingernails, and the worst part was the feeling that I hadn't been alone inside myself during that time, that something had driven my body while I watched from behind my own eyes, unable to scream, unable to resist, like being locked in a glass box while someone else puppeted my skin, and I tried to tell people, tried to reach out, but every time I opened my mouth to speak about it, the voice would hiss inside my head, freeze my tongue, twist my thoughts, and the words would come out wrong or not at all. And then the bleeding started, black and thick like oil, from my ears, my nose, sometimes even my eyes, and it would stop as quickly as it began, always leaving behind the smell of burnt metal and the sensation of something sliding deeper into my veins, like vines taking root, like teeth sinking into flesh. And then came the dreams of drowning, not in water, but in something heavier, thicker, something with memories and hunger, something that remembered stars before they died, something that fed on belief and fear and flesh and had chosen me because I had pulled it from the river and given it breath. And soon I started finding drawings I don't remember making, hundreds of them, all over my apartment, on the walls, under the bed, inside my closet, intricate circular designs made of impossible geometry and dead languages I'd never studied, but I understood them. I don't know how, but I did, and every time I looked at them too long they moved, pulsed, breathed, whispered my name in voices that sounded like my father's cough, my mother's lullaby, my own sobs echoing from deep inside the earth, and I started hearing noises under the floor, scratching, slithering, rhythmic tapping like a code I couldn't decipher but understood was for me, always for me. And one night the walls of my room began to leak that same black fluid, not in drips but in slow crawling lines that spelled out messages in languages I wasn't supposed to read but did anyway. And the message said I was becoming something else, that my bones were softening, my skin was learning to breathe underwater, that soon I wouldn't need lungs or thoughts or fear. And I looked in the mirror and didn't see my face anymore. Not really, just the shape of it with something else underneath, pushing out, stretching the skin thin like a mask, and I knew that I had to get rid of the thing I found, had to dig it up and cast it back into the depths before it fully replaced me. But when I went behind the shed, it wasn't buried anymore. There was just a hole, deep and dark and lined with flesh, pulsing, breathing, and the smell hit me like rot and wet stone and the taste of teeth, and I knew it had never been buried, not really. It had just waited, just grown stronger with every word I thought, and every second I doubted myself, and I fell to my knees and vomited blood and fish eggs and small wriggling things that screamed when they hit the dirt. And I tried to run, but the trees bit toward me and the moon blinked, and I heard my name shouted from the sky in a voice I didn't recognize but knew I belonged to. And I've been on the run ever since, sleeping in abandoned places, drinking rainwater, avoiding mirrors and reflections, because every time I catch a glimpse of myself, I see it a little more clearly, the thing inside, the thing wearing me, and it smiles wider every day. And sometimes I wake up surrounded by water with no memory of how I got there. And once I woke up on the roof of a building with carvings around my ankles like a crown, and the voice told me to jump, told me the ground was soft and the world below was ready to open for me. But I didn't, not that time, not yet. And now I write everything down because I forget more. Each day, forget who I was before the river, forget what my voice used to sound like before it was shared, forget how to separate my thoughts from the ones it gives me. But I need someone to know that I'm still in here somewhere, buried beneath the flesh, screaming behind the eyes. And if you ever find something in the water that feels like it wants to be found, please leave it alone. Please let it rot where it sleeps. Because if you don't, if you touch it, if you listen, it will come with you. It will wear your memories like a coat. It will live behind your ribs like a whisper waiting to speak. And one day you'll wake up and find yourself gone. Not dead, not vanished, just gone. And something else will be smiling through your teeth and waving at your loved ones and remembering your name even after you've forgotten it. Story 25. I don't know when it started or if it ever really started at all, because some part of me believes it was always there, waiting, like a cavity in a tooth you don't feel until you bite down too hard, like a shadow you don't see until it moves, like a thought you never asked to have but keeps coming back, louder and sharper each time until it's the only thing you can hear. And maybe it's my fault for thinking I could leave the past in the past, for thinking the mind is a container instead of a sponge, because all I wanted was to get away from the noise, from the people, from myself, which is why I moved out here, into the woods, alone, where the trees stretch taller than memory and the fog never lifts, where the sky hangs low like it's listening. And the first few weeks were peaceful, quiet, beautiful even, until I started hearing the knocking not on the door, but inside the walls, inside the floors, inside the mirror when I brushed my teeth at night and saw something behind me that didn't move when I did. And I told myself it was the house settling or mice in the walls or just nerves from being so far from everything and everyone. But the truth is I recognized the sound even though I didn't want to admit it, because it wasn't knocking like a visitor asking to come in. It was knocking like a prisoner tapping code through stone, like something inside trying to get out. And I began to feel it before I heard it. This vibration in my chest, faint at first, like a second. Heartbeat that didn't belong to me but was synced with mine, just half a second behind. And I thought maybe it was just anxiety or maybe too much caffeine. But the feeling didn't go away, and the knocking got louder, and one night I woke up standing in front of the mirror in the hallway with my fingers pressed against the glass and my reflection smiling at me even though I wasn't smiling at all. And it mouthed something I didn't understand but felt anyway, something like "welcome back," or "I missed you," or "it's time." And the next morning I found my phone full of photos I didn't take, pictures of me sleeping, of me staring into the camera with eyes I don't recognize, of the woods behind my house where the trees are too close together and the ground is covered in bones I never noticed before. And I stopped sleeping after that because every time I closed my eyes I felt it rising from somewhere inside my chest. Not like a dream, but like a memory that didn't belong to me, of a place. Without light and a voice that called my name in a way no one ever had before, like it owned me, like it built me. And I started forgetting things, little things at first, like where I left my keys or what day it was. But then I'd forget entire conversations, hours at a time. And once I woke up with mud caked to my knees and something sharp under my fingernails and a dead crow on my pillow, wings spread, eyes open, beak cracked like a scream, and there was no blood, just that second heartbeat. Louder now, stronger, and I knew it was growing, feeding, learning how to walk in my skin, because sometimes I'd see myself from outside my body, like I was watching through someone else's eyes, and whoever it was wore my face but didn't blink the right way. Didn't smile the right way, and when it spoke to people in town they looked confused, like they were trying to place a familiar voice with the wrong mouth. And one day I found a notebook full of handwriting that wasn't mine but looked close. Full of drawings of the house, of the woods, of a door under the floorboards that I didn't know existed until I lifted the rug and found the latch exactly where the drawing said it would be. And when I opened it, the air that came out smelled like old teeth and burnt hair and something deeper, something colder, like the bottom of a well that hasn't seen light since before language. And there were stairs, impossibly long stairs, leading down into blackness. And I stood there for hours just listening to the sound of water dripping and something breathing and something else, laughing. And I didn't go down then, not yet. But after that night, I couldn't stop hearing it, even outside. even in town, in the supermarket, in the library. In the sound of children playing, always beneath everything like a bass line only I could hear, saying things I couldn't repeat, not out loud, not without letting it closer. And I tried to record it once, tried to play it back to prove I wasn't losing my mind. But the recording was just static, and underneath the static was my own voice, whispering in a language I never learned but understood anyway. And that night I found the mirror cracked and bleeding from the edges like it was a wound in the wall. And I swear to God my reflection had teeth too many and too long and eyes like wells full of night. And I knew it wasn't just trying to become me. It already had, piece by piece. And I was what was left behind, hollowed out and kept alive only. Because it wasn't done yet. And I started writing this because I needed to tell someone before the last part of me disappears, before I forget how to even speak my own name, before I stop recognizing the things I've touched and loved and destroyed. Because something in me is changing, not metaphorically, not poetically, but physically. My bones feel softer, my joints bend the wrong way when I sleep, my teeth fall out and grow back sharper, longer, and sometimes I wake up with words carved into my skin in languages I don't know, and sometimes those words move when I look away, and sometimes they hum, and I hum back because it feels good, it feels right. And I know now that the thing in the walls was never trapped. It was just waiting for me to be ready, just waiting for me to peel away enough of myself to make room for it. And now there's almost nothing left but the voice and the smile and the cold, and when I look in the mirror now, I don't see myself at all, just something wearing my face, grinning, tapping on the glass like it's about to break through. And maybe it already has. Maybe I'm just the echo, the skin left over after the meal. Maybe this story is the last thing I'll ever write. Maybe by the time you read this, it won't be me anymore at all, just the thing that came after, the thing that was always here, waiting, whispering, becoming. Story 26. I know now that the worst part of being haunted isn't the knocking, the voices, the shadows, or even the dreams. It's the moment you realize the haunting isn't in your house, or in the woods behind it, or in that damned photograph you found in the attic. It's in you, and I think it always was, but I'll start from when I first noticed something wasn't right. Even if deep down I already knew something in me had been broken, shifted, called, maybe even born wrong. Because when I was a kid I used to talk to things in my closet. Not imaginary friends, not ghosts exactly, but something else, something slow and patient that waited for my voice every night. And when my parents thought it was cute, I let them think so, because if I told them the truth, that the voice on the other side of the closet door didn't sound like a child, but like someone chewing on my name, like bones cracking under mud, they would have taken me away, and they tried to once after they found me sleepwalking in the backyard, with dirt packed into my mouth and symbols scratched into my skin with my own fingernails. But nothing helped. Not the medicine or the therapy or the priest they brought in, who left without saying a word and died a week later under circumstances no one talks about. And things were quiet for a while after that. Not gone, just waiting. And I grew up thinking I'd left it all behind until I inherited the old house after my parents died. Mom from cancer, Dad from something that made his skin peel off, in long red sheets, and left him screaming about the doors under the floor. And the moment I stepped inside, I felt it again, like the walls breathed out and recognized me, like they'd been starving, and I knew it was a mistake. But I stayed because I had nothing left and the house was paid off, and I thought maybe I could beat it, whatever it was, thought maybe it was just trauma with teeth. But the truth is I think it wanted me back, like a dog sniffing out the scent of something it once buried. And it started small, with things shifting at the edge of vision, light bulbs popping in the middle of the night, furniture never quite where I left it, and then came the humming, soft at first, like someone singing under their breath in the next room. Only there was no one else in the house, and every time I tried to record it or catch it, it would stop the second I touched a device, as if it knew. And then the mirrors began to lie. Not with full reflections, not right away, but with little details. I'd blink and my reflection wouldn't, or I'd smile and it would frown, and one time it mouthed a word I didn't say out loud, and I still don't know what it meant. but it made me bleed from my nose and black out for an hour. And when I came to, I was standing in the basement holding an old photo I don't remember taking of myself staring into the crawl space under the stairs. And I swear to you, in the photo, something had its hands on my shoulders, something tall and wrong and grinning, with teeth like rusted wire. And I burned the photo, but the image stayed in my head, and that night I woke up with its handprint on my back, burned into my skin like a brand. And after that, it escalated. Things started moving inside me, not emotionally. I mean literally moving, like something swimming under my ribs, like worms in my spine, and I could hear it whispering again, not in the walls this time, but behind my eyes, telling me it had waited long enough, that I had been promised to it. And I still tried to rationalize, still tried to pretend it was all psychological, that I was having a breakdown, until I found the tapes. Old cassette tapes in the attic labeled with dates that didn't make sense and names I'd never heard of, but when I played them I heard myself, my voice, saying things I've never said in languages I don't speak. And one of them ended with me screaming in a voice that sounded like it was made of more than one mouth, like a chorus of insects echoing through bone. And I broke every tape, but the sounds followed me, in my dreams, in my bones, in the cracks of my skull where it was nesting, growing, feeding off memory. And I found journals in the house written in my handwriting that I've never written, detailing rituals, invocations, offerings, and worse, drawings of something that I can only describe as a hole made of hunger, a wound in the world, always smiling, always open. And the more I read, the more I remembered, not events exactly, but feelings, like deja vu dripping with blood and ash and something that tasted like old teeth and grief. And soon I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't touch anyone without feeling like they were made of meat and sadness. And the mirror me started talking to me even when I wasn't near a mirror, started finishing my sentences, started reminding me that I was the one who called it in the first place, that I made the deal as a child, that I begged it to never leave me alone again, and it kept its promise, and now it's mine, and I'm its. And every time I try to leave the house I black out and wake up somewhere deeper, somewhere darker, where the walls are soft and wet and pulse like a throat. And I know I'm inside it now, not metaphorically, literally. And it's learning how to use my skin, how to walk in it. And when I look in the mirror, I see it more clearly every day. The thing I thought I locked in the closet, the thing I thought I could forget. And the worst part is that I'm starting to like the way it feels, the strength it gives me, the clarity, like I was always meant to be hollow, to be worn like a coat. And now I dream of places with no sky, no ground, just mouths. And I feel myself slipping away one memory at a time, and I don't think I'm going to stop it anymore, because what's left of me is tired, and the rest is so hungry. Story 27. I haven't spoken this out loud before because every time I try, the words die in my throat like something choking me from the inside out. And I've come to believe that maybe that's exactly what it is, something inside me that doesn't want me to tell you. Something that's lived with me, beneath me, through me for years now. Something I thought was grief or depression or guilt or just the weight of life sitting too heavy on my spine. But it's not. It's not human. It's not psychological. It's not spiritual either, because I've tried the rituals, the prayers, the exorcisms, the screaming and scratching and starving and sleeping, and nothing makes it go away. And before you think this is all just metaphor or madness, I need you to understand that I'm not writing this for help. I'm writing this to confess, to warn, and maybe to beg, because something found me when I was 17. On a night I shouldn't have been walking home alone, on a shortcut I'd taken 1,000 times, past the broken fence, through the ditch full of stagnant water and thorny vines, under that whispering tunnel that always felt too cold, too still, and too hungry. And I remember the exact second it started because the shadows changed color and sound stopped being sound. And the tunnel didn't echo that night. It swallowed, it consumed, and I heard something breathe in reverse. Yes, in reverse, like it was pulling my breath out of my mouth and holding it like a coin, like it had bought me with that one breath. And I froze, not from fear exactly, but from permission, like I'd just signed something without knowing it. And everything after that moment was fogged over for days, weeks even, until I started dreaming of teeth, not rows, but circles. Teeth like barnacles that grinned at me from ceilings, closets, wrists, mouths that didn't belong to people, and sounds that came from inside my own thoughts like someone humming with their mouth sewn shut. And I thought it was just nightmares until I started finding things in my room, little things, things that hadn't been there the day before. A feather soaked in tar, a coin with no face, a tooth that didn't match mine. And then I started losing time, not minutes, but hours. Whole nights where I'd wake up in places I couldn't explain, basements I didn't remember entering, bathrooms fogged with names scratched into the mirror, names I'd never heard before that made my gums bleed when I tried to pronounce them. And I stopped talking to people because they looked at me too long, like they were trying to remember who I was, like they'd met me in a dream and were waiting for the nightmare to start again. And the worst part is I started enjoying the silence. Started feeling more comfortable with the hum behind my thoughts than I did with my own voice. Started listening to it instead of resisting, and it taught me things I don't want to say but can unlearn. Things about how skin grows and how it can be removed in perfect sheets, how bones can hum if you boil them long enough, how names have weight when spoken backwards, and sometimes when I close my eyes I see a room I've never entered, but know like a memory, a room full of jars with things still alive inside them, still blinking, still whispering in Morse code against glass lids, begging to be freed. And I know my name is on one of those jars because I can feel my sense of self slipping like breath on a mirror, fading every time I look into my own eyes too long. And I've tried everything, every form of help they offer. Pills, therapy, hypnosis, sleep clinics, prayer, fasting, cutting myself just to feel something real, burning sigils into my floor with lye and salt and my own blood, and nothing stops it. It's in me, under me, becoming me, and it's clever. It hides when others are around, plays human through me like a puppet. But I see the little mistakes, the way my fingers twitch like they're waiting for strings, the way my shadow moves when I'm still, the way mirrors warp for just a second too long, showing glimpses of what's underneath, not skin, not organs, but something older, something that was here before bones, before light, something that wears the shape of people but was never human, and it smiles when I scream. It hums lullabies when I try to fight it. It speaks in the voice of people I've lost just to break me open again and again, and I think it feeds on that, on grief and memory and the slow erasure of will, because it doesn't want to kill me, it wants to wear me, and I've started to let it because the lines are blurring and I'm so tired, so deeply exhausted of trying to hold on to what's left of me. And now I dream of a doorway, the same one every night, made of fingers and teeth and tongues sewn shut, and beyond it there's laughter, not cruel, but joyous, like a family reunion, like I'm being called home, and I've started answering, I've started laughing back, and sometimes I wake up already halfway through a sentence I don't understand, written in ash across the wall, and the thing that scares me most isn't that it's taken over, but that it's better at being me than I ever was. It remembers birthdays, it smiles at strangers, it looks into mirrors without flinching. And now I see people looking at me with love again, and I wonder how long before I forget I was ever anything else, how long before I am just another jar in that room, another name scratched into the teeth of something hungry, watching through my own eyes as someone else walks my body back into the dark. Story 28. It started with the knocking, soft at first, like a branch tapping gently against my bedroom window, except there was no tree outside. Just empty space and the dark outline of the old shed that I was always told to stay away from as a child because something bad happened there long before I was born. Something my mother would never speak of except to say that some places remember. Some places stay open like wounds that never scar over, and I used to think she was just being dramatic until I heard the knock again on a night when the wind didn't blow, and the moon was a slit of silver over the hills, and I sat up in bed because I knew it wasn't a dream. I knew something was calling me the way a scent calls a starving dog, or how silence can become a scream when it's deep enough, and I told myself it was nothing, went back to sleep. Ignored the way the air in my room had turned thick like the breath of something hiding just under the floorboards. And when I woke up, I had dirt under my fingernails and my feet were muddy like I'd walked somewhere in my sleep, but I didn't remember leaving my bed. Didn't remember anything at all except a faint voice whispering numbers I couldn't understand, but wrote down anyway, and when I looked them up, they were GPS coordinates that led to a spot behind the shed where the ground was soft and the grass grew in strange spirals, and I swear it smelled like burnt hair and sour milk, and when I touched the soil it pulsed like it had a heartbeat, and I felt mine match it, and from that moment on everything changed. Everything twisted inward like I was folding into myself, not my body, but my memory, my will, my name, like I was being rewritten, and I started hearing things in the corners of rooms. Voices that weren't quite human, too slow, too wet, too old, and sometimes they would call my name, but not in a way that wanted my attention, in a way that wanted my skin, my bones, the heat of my blood like it was fuel, and I began seeing shadows that moved in ways shadows shouldn't, like they were dancing without light, and reflections that grinned when I wasn't smiling, in rooms that were colder than they had any right to be even when the heater was on full blast, and I thought maybe I was going crazy until I found the photographs hidden in the attic, dozens of them, all of me sleeping, taken from the foot of my bed, dated weeks before I moved back into the house, before I even returned to this town, and someone had written things on the back of each one. Phrases I couldn't understand in a language that looked like rust and teeth and sinew. And after I touched the last photo, I started bleeding from my nose every night at 3:33 a.m., the same time the knocking would begin, louder now. Not on the window, but from under my bed, from inside the walls, from the mirror, and I'd see things in the glass that weren't behind me, faces without eyes, hands with too many fingers, and I tried to tell someone, tried to reach out, but people stopped answering my messages, stopped taking my calls, and when I saw my reflection glitch in the store window, just for a second, it looked like someone else entirely, taller, thinner, not quite right, and I think it smiled. And that night, I carved a mark into my arm that I don't remember doing, a spiral with an eye in the center, and when I washed off the blood, it didn't fade, and over the next few days it moved, just slightly, like it was crawling up toward my shoulder. And the dreams became worse, not just dreams but memories, I think, but not mine, memories of being buried alive, of fire inside my lungs, of voices chanting around my body as it sank into the soil, and I could feel the roots wrapping around my ribs like fingers. And I woke up screaming with dirt in my mouth and worms in my sheets, and no one believed me. No one ever believes the haunted when they're still breathing. And I stopped going outside because the birds stopped singing when I passed. The dogs started howling. At nothing, the air itself recoiled from me, and I swear I saw a little girl point at me and cry before her mother pulled her away like I was something infectious. And I know now that I am. I'm not just haunted, I am the haunting. I am what lives in the walls now. What creaks in the night. What dreams of blood and dust and teeth. Because whatever I found behind that shed didn't just follow me, it entered me, became me, fed on the parts of me that were soft, that could love or hope or pray, and left only hunger, only knowing. And I write this now with hands that shake and eyes that won't close, because when I do sleep I wake up standing in places I shouldn't be, holding things I don't remember finding, speaking languages I've never heard. And I can feel something inside me laughing, watching, waiting, growing teeth and eyes and hands in the dark places of my mind. And I know soon there won't be any of me left at all, just the thing that knocks and grins and whispers to the next person it wants to wear. And if you're reading this, if you found this, burn it, bury it, forget it, because stories are doors, and this one is wide open now. Story 29. I know what I'm about to say won't sound real, but I swear to you, on the last shred of whatever I still have left that makes me human, that it happened exactly as I remember, though even the word remember feels like a lie now, because my memories have frayed, overwritten themselves, bled into things that I know I didn't live through, and yet somehow feel in my bones like I did. And it all began in the quietest, dumbest way. Me moving into my uncle's old farmhouse after he died, a man I never really knew, a man my family whispered about more than they spoke of directly, a man whose name I barely heard as a child except in tints, low mutters like people were afraid even mentioning him might bring him back. And when the lawyer called to tell me I'd inherited the house, I thought it was some kind of joke because I hadn't seen the man in over a decade, and last I'd heard, he was living somewhere off-grid, paranoid, obsessed with spirits or radiation or mind control or something equally bizarre. And yet there it was in writing. His land, his home, his belongings, all now legally mine. And I thought, stupidly, naively, that I could sell it, maybe renovate it first, flip it for profit, or even just rent it out. So I went alone, just me and my camera and my dog in a packed car. The kind of road trip you romanticize in your head until the tires hit gravel and the trees get too close and the radio turns to static, and suddenly you realize how far you are from anything that might help you if something went wrong. And from the second I stepped into that house, I felt it. Not something watching. No, something waiting, like the walls had lungs, like the floors had been starving, and I'd stepped into the mouth of something that had forgotten how to chew. And at first it was subtle, time feeling weird, lights flickering when I was alone, my phone battery draining even when turned off. And then the dreams started. And I call them dreams because that's easier, that's safer, but they weren't dreams. They were interruptions, slits in the night through which something slipped, showing me things that didn't make sense. Hands with too many knuckles, voices without mouths. A song that looped endlessly in a language that turned my teeth to ice. And I'd wake up with blood on my pillow and scratches down my legs. And once I swear, I woke up standing in the field behind the house, barefoot, in the rain. And when I got back inside, the front door was still locked from the inside, and my dog was barking at the attic like something up there was breathing louder than both of us. And over the next few days, I found things hidden in the walls, tape recordings, notebooks, symbols carved under floorboards and behind wallpaper. And at first I thought maybe my uncle had been insane, just a paranoid hermit scribbling his delusions into every corner. But then the recordings started matching the dreams, and the notebooks referenced places I'd seen. And then I found the photo, the one that changed everything. A picture of me, asleep, in that house, taken years before I ever got there, before I even knew it existed. And the person who took it was standing in the mirror behind me with no face and arms like bent wire. And I swear to you I didn't scream, not because I wasn't afraid, but because I couldn't, like something was holding my breath hostage. And from that point on, the house changed. Or maybe I did. Maybe I just started noticing what had always been there, like the way the shadows didn't line up with the light, or how my voice would echo back to me a second too late and slightly wrong, as if someone else was repeating what I said. And then came the knocking, not from the doors or windows, but from the inside of the walls, from the drains, from beneath the floorboards right under my bed. And my dog, my sweet old retriever who had been with me through everything, stopped eating, stopped sleeping, just stared at corners and whined until one day I woke up and she was gone. And all I found was her collar in the fireplace and claw marks on the inside of the flue. And I lost days after that, actual days, where I'd blink and suddenly it was night again, or I'd wake up with writing all over my arms in that same language from the dreams. And I tried to leave. I swear to God I tried. I packed a bag. I drove until I hit a gas station, and when I went inside to ask for directions, the cashier stared at me like I was speaking backwards and just said, "You're already home," over and over until I backed out and realized the gas station didn't have any roads leading to or from it, just empty lots and fog that tasted like ash. And when I got back in my car, the clock had stopped at 3:33 and wouldn't change no matter how far I drove. And I somehow ended up back at the house even though I'd been driving in the opposite direction. And that's when I knew I wasn't just haunted, I was claimed. And it wasn't about the house, it was about me, because the dream started. Showing my face, doing things I hadn't done yet, wearing clothes I didn't own, being in places I hadn't visited but recognized anyway. And the figure in the mirror was getting closer, clearer, like it was filling in blanks, like it was learning me, becoming me. Until one day I caught myself saying things I didn't mean, reacting to sounds I hadn't heard, smiling when I should have been afraid. And my reflection would linger just a second too long. And when I finally climbed into the attic, thinking maybe the answer was there, maybe if I destroyed what was up there I could stop it, I found dozens of drawings on the walls, portraits of me, over and over, aging, changing, decaying, until the final one wasn't me at all, just a silhouette with hollow eyes and its mouth wide open, swallowing something shaped like a star. And when I turned around to leave, the attic door was gone, replaced with smooth wood like it had never been there. And the light bulb shattered without falling, just broke in total silence. And I stood there in the dark for what felt like days while something scraped against the ceiling, something that dragged itself in circles above me, whispering a name that I know now is mine, but wasn't always, because I think I've lived this life before. I think I've come to this house in different forms, with different faces, and each time I forgot who I was until the house reminded me, until it fed me to whatever lies behind the attic door, which only opens when you've given up, when you've accepted the truth that there's no outside anymore, no real world left for you. Just this looping hunger, this recursive possession, and I don't remember what my real voice sounds like or what year it is, or even if I was ever truly alive in the first place. And if you're reading this, if this file reached you, if these words are in front of your eyes now, then I've already started bleeding through, because that's how it spreads, through attention, through memory, through belief. And you should close this, delete this, burn your device if you have to, because it knows you now, it sees you now, and it's so very, very hungry. Story 30. I used to think I understood fear, that it was something you could identify, control, maybe even laugh off if you were brave enough, but I learned quickly that fear isn't an emotion, it's an infection. A sickness that spreads under your skin and eats you from the inside out until you don't know what you were afraid of in the first place, only that it's always been there, crawling beneath your thoughts. And it all began one winter when I moved into an old apartment on the outskirts of town, a place no one else wanted, a building that had sat empty for years, its windows boarded up, its hallway carpet stained with who knows what. But it was cheap, too cheap, which should have been my first clue. But I was desperate, fresh off a breakup. And after a long drive with too much silence, I was willing to take anything I could get. So I took the apartment, and the landlord, this strange man with too much hair and eyes that didn't blink enough, gave me a key and warned me not to disturb the past. But at the time, I thought he was just eccentric, old-fashioned, and maybe a little sad, and I laughed it off, thinking to myself how little I knew about the things that could really haunt you, how much I didn't know about the way something can find its way into you, its essence creeping into your mind like a shadow with too many limbs. And the first week was nothing but normal, the kind of normal you find in places that feel old and forgotten, where the walls creak at night and the pipes groan when the weather changes. And I told myself it was nothing, just an old building settling. But then the whispers started, soft at first, almost indistinguishable from the hum of the fridge or the wind rustling through the trees outside. But when I stopped to listen, they were there, faint voices, just out of reach, speaking words I couldn't understand. And at first I thought I was imagining things, sleep deprivation playing tricks on me after a long day of unpacking and trying to get everything set up. But the whispers didn't stop, they only got louder, coming from the walls, from the dark spaces between the beams of the ceiling. And then came the knocking, not at the door, not at the window, but at the floor beneath me, just a steady, rhythmic tapping that matched my heartbeat. And I remember lying in bed that first night, eyes wide open, listening to the sound of something moving below me, slow, deliberate, as if it was waiting for something, but I told myself it was just the old pipes, maybe something with the foundation. And when I called the landlord to ask about it, he just gave me that strange smile of his and said, "It's always been that way. The building's old, like I said. Just ignore it." And I hung up feeling unsettled but willing to let it go, thinking I could just adjust, like people adjust to everything, to weird noises, to uncomfortable spaces. But the next night was worse, much worse. I was woken up by the sound of my own name being whispered, soft but distinct, clear this time, as if it had been waiting for me to fall into a deep enough sleep for it to slip through, and I shot up in bed, heart pounding in my chest. The room so still it felt like time had stopped, and for a moment, I thought maybe I had imagined it, that maybe it was the wind again or the sound of my own thoughts bleeding out in the dark. But then it came again, the whisper, unmistakable, my name, as if the very air was calling to me. And when I glanced at the clock, it was 3:33 a.m., and I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I didn't even try. I just sat up, eyes wide, staring into the dark, my pulse racing, convinced something was waiting in the corners. But the morning came like a small blessing, and I went about my day trying to pretend nothing had happened, trying to convince myself that it was just the stress, the loneliness, the isolation. But that night the whispers grew stronger, more distinct, like they were circling me, closing in, and I could swear I felt the presence of something behind me, something in the room with me, pressing in on my back, a cold breath against my neck that made the hairs on my arms stand up. And I tried to get out of the apartment, tried to leave, but my feet wouldn't move, like the floor was sticky with something dark. And I remember the last thing I saw before everything went black was the reflection in the mirror across from me, a face, not mine, but a face, grinning wide with hollow eyes. And when I woke up, hours later, I was lying on the floor, my hands clawing at the carpet like I had been trying to get away from something, but there was nothing except the whispering, louder now, coming from the very walls themselves, as if the apartment itself was alive, breathing, pulling me in. And I tried to leave again, I really did. But when I stepped out into the hall, I found the door locked, and I couldn't find my keys, couldn't remember where I'd put them. And that's when I realized I was trapped, stuck in a place that was changing, shifting, molding around me like it was deciding how best to break me, how best to fold me into itself. And it was then that I started hearing the footsteps, slow, heavy steps, like someone was pacing in the hall outside my door. But when I opened it, no one was there, just the thick, suffocating silence that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. And I ran to the stairs, but when I got to the landing, I froze, because at the bottom of the stairs, in the dark, I could see the figure of a man, tall, thin, bent at an odd angle, with a smile stretched too wide across his face. And I know I should have screamed. I know I should have turned and run, but I couldn't. My body wouldn't move. And as I stood there, frozen, the figure began to climb the stairs toward me. Its footsteps loud in the silence, and the closer it got, the more I could hear the whispers, my name, my full name, repeated over and over, like a chant, like it was calling me. And I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything, but I couldn't, not until the thing was right in front of me. And when it spoke, its voice was a rasping, guttural sound, like it had no lungs, like it was speaking from the grave. And it said, "You've always been here. You're not leaving." I ran then, down the stairs, through the hall, out the door. And I didn't stop until I was in my car, driving without any clear direction, just trying to put as much distance between me and that place as I could. But no matter how far I went, no matter where I drove, I could feel it, feel that thing following me, feel it in the air, in my breath, in the back of my mind. And now, here, hours later, I'm sitting in this car, writing this down, and I know that no matter what I do, no matter where I go, it's already inside me, and it's waiting. And I can't outrun it because it's not the apartment that's haunted. It's me. It's been me all along. And I don't know how to get rid of it. And I don't know how to make it stop. But I know that when it comes, when it finally catches up to me, it won't just take my body. It'll take my soul too. And there won't be any trace left behind. No one will remember me. No one will even know I was ever here. And I'm writing this so that, at the very least, someone will know the truth. Someone will know that I wasn't just running from something. I was running to something that's been waiting for me, something that's already here. Story 31. I used to live in a house on the outskirts of town, a small, weathered cottage with peeling paint and sagging gutters, the kind of house no one would choose unless they were desperate. But I wasn't desperate. I had no choice, not after my wife died. And I couldn't stay in the city anymore, not with her memory haunting every corner, every room, every shadow. So I packed up what little was left of our life together, shoved it into boxes, and found a place far enough away from everything to pretend I could start over, but I was wrong. And that's the first thing I need to tell you. Running away doesn't make you escape. It just puts you in a different place for the monsters to find you. And the first thing I noticed when I walked into the house was how cold it was. Even though it was the middle of summer, and the air had this heaviness, like the walls themselves had absorbed decades of regret. And I remember thinking that maybe the house had its own memories, its own ghosts, and I laughed it off, trying to convince myself I was being silly. But then the strange things started happening. At night, the house would creak, louder than it should have, like the foundation was shifting, like it was trying to tell me something, but I ignored it. I kept saying it was just the wind or the house settling. But then I started hearing footsteps when no one was around. Slow, heavy steps that didn't belong to me or anyone else. And when I checked the rooms, there was no one there, but the floorboards would still be warm, like someone had been standing in the same spot for hours. And I tried to leave. I tried to go back to the city, but every time I reached the road, something would pull me back, like invisible hands gripping the steering wheel, forcing me to turn around, to drive back. And I thought I was going crazy. I really did. But I stayed. I stayed because I didn't know what else to do, and I figured if I just gave it time, the house would let me go, that the weight of it would ease off my shoulders. But it never did. Instead, it got worse, each night more unsettling than the last, until the whispers started. It was subtle at first, just a soft murmur from the walls, too faint to make out, but I could feel them, like the house was breathing with me, its heartbeat syncing with mine, and I thought I was imagining it. But then the whispers grew clearer, and they started calling my name, soft at first, just my first name, but then they started saying more, things I didn't recognize, things that made my skin crawl. And I'd wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, unable to move, unable to scream, like something was holding me down. And one night, I woke up to find my wife's picture, the one I had left on the nightstand, was gone, and I searched the entire house, tearing through drawers, under the bed, in the attic, but it was nowhere to be found, and the whispers were louder now, insistent, demanding, and I didn't know what they wanted, but I knew they were growing stronger, more powerful, and I thought I could outrun them. So I packed my things and went outside, but when I stepped into the yard, I felt it, the same presence that had been watching me from the shadows. Only now it was standing right in front of me, too close, its cold breath against my neck, and I turned to face it. But there was nothing there, just the empty night. But the ground beneath me was shaking, like something huge was moving underneath, and I ran back into the house, locked the doors, and tried to sleep, but the house wouldn't let me. The air thick with a suffocating pressure that made it hard to breathe, and I began to hear things, voices, cries, as if something was trapped inside the walls, something that had been there for years, waiting. And the next day, when I went into the basement to check the furnace, I found a small door hidden behind a pile of old furniture, a door I swore hadn't been there the day before, and without thinking, I opened it. And I wish I hadn't, because behind that door, in the darkness, was a room, a small, cold room, and it smelled like death, like something had been rotting there for years. And I found something in the corner, a pile of old clothes, and underneath it, a set of bones, not human, not animal, just raw, twisted, broken in a way that shouldn't have been possible. And as soon as I touched them, the house screamed, the walls groaned and rattled, and the temperature plummeted, and I ran out of that basement like my life depended on it. But I could still feel it, still hear it. The house, it was alive, and it wanted something. From me, something I didn't understand, and that's when I saw it, standing in the doorway of the room, its face hidden in shadow, but its eyes, those eyes, they were full of hunger, of rage, and it reached out for me. and I ran. I ran faster than I ever thought I could, straight out of the house, into the yard, and I kept running, even when I heard it follow me, its footsteps just behind me, faster, louder, and when I reached the road, I tried to get into my car, but the door wouldn't open, the locks jammed, and I could hear it getting closer, that horrible sound of something dragging behind me. And I knew it was only a matter of time before it caught me, before it took me back. And that's when I remembered. I had forgotten to check the attic. The attic that my wife had loved. The attic I had never gone into after her death. The attic where she had spent so much time. Where she had kept her old things, her journals, her paintings, and I don't know why I remembered it then, why I thought that it would matter, but it did. And I turned around. I ran back toward the house. And when I got inside, the air felt different, suffocating, thick with an almost tangible presence. And I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, but I forced myself up to the attic, and the door was already open, the stairs creaking under my weight. And when I reached the top, I found it. Her journal, her paintings, the pieces of her life that I thought I had left behind. But then I saw the newest painting, and it was of me, standing in the exact spot where I was. But it was wrong. My face was twisted, my eyes empty, my mouth open in a scream, and the painting was still wet, the paint dripping, as if it had been done just moments ago, and I turned around to leave, to get away from that place. But there, standing in the doorway, was my wife, not as I remembered her, but changed, her eyes wide and vacant, her mouth twisted into a smile that wasn't hers, and as I opened my mouth to scream, the whispers started again, louder, echoing through the walls, and they said, "You never left. And now, I'm here, stuck in this house, and I can't leave, because it's waiting for me. It's waiting for me to understand that I'm already gone, already part of this place, and I can't escape, not from the house, not from the voices, and not from her." Story 32. It was a Sunday when it started, the day she moved in, and at first, I didn't notice anything strange. She seemed like a perfectly normal person, just someone looking for a place to live. And I was happy to have someone in the spare room of my apartment because it had been empty for months since my ex moved out, leaving the place feeling too big, too quiet, and I remember her first words when she came in. How she smiled and said she had just gotten out of a bad relationship, how she was looking for somewhere calm to gather herself, and I offered her a cup of tea. We talked for a bit, and there was nothing particularly out of the ordinary about it, nothing that would make me suspect what was to come. But it was only after she settled in that I began to feel the changes, small things at first, like how the air in the apartment felt heavier when she was around, like something was constantly pressing down, and then the whispering started, faint at first, coming from the corners of the room, but always when she was there. And it wasn't the kind of whisper you can easily ignore, not the usual noise of a house settling, but something else, something deliberate. And when I asked her if she heard it too, she just smiled and said, "Maybe you're just tired." But that didn't explain why the lights would flicker whenever she was in a room, or why the temperature would drop so suddenly, or why I started to feel like I wasn't alone, even when I was. And it wasn't long before I started seeing things, shapes in the corner of my eye, things moving where there shouldn't be anything, like a shadow just beyond the reach of the light. And the first time I saw the face in the mirror, I almost screamed, but I didn't, because it wasn't mine, it wasn't anyone's. Just a distorted, grayish face with hollow eyes staring back at me from the reflection. And when I blinked, it was gone, but the cold lingered, and I tried to write it off, to tell myself I was just stressed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. And then one night, after I had gone to bed, I woke up to hear her talking, not to me, but to someone else, and it wasn't a conversation, just her voice saying things like, "They won't leave," and "I can feel them watching," and "It's so close now," and I didn't know what to think, but I couldn't ignore it. And when I went into the living room, she was sitting in the dark, her eyes wide, staring at the wall, and I asked her what was wrong, and she turned to me with that same unsettling smile and said, "It's nothing. but I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't just scared, she was terrified. And that was when things started getting really bad, when I couldn't sleep anymore, couldn't focus, couldn't breathe without feeling like something was right behind me, and I started seeing things I couldn't explain. Sometimes it would be a figure standing at the end of the hallway, too tall, too thin, with a face I couldn't make out, but I could feel it watching me. And when I'd turn to look again, it would be gone. And then the whispers got louder, more distinct, voices that didn't sound human, like they were coming from the walls, and I couldn't escape them, couldn't outrun them, and I thought I was losing my mind. But it was only after I found the pictures that I knew something was seriously wrong, because I had never seen them before. Old photographs, faded and yellowed, some of them so blurry I could barely make out the faces, but they were all of her. And I don't mean just her, but her with people I didn't recognize, standing in front of places I didn't know. And at first, I thought maybe she had been traveling before she moved in. Maybe these were old family photos or something. But then I noticed something strange. Her eyes, they were always the same, empty, hollow, and I remember thinking, who is she really? And it was at that moment that I realized I had never really asked her anything about her past, about where she had been, who she had been. And that was when I started to look closer, to pay attention to things I had ignored before. The way she would vanish into the other room for hours at a time, the way she would hum softly to herself when she thought no one was around, the way she would stare at the walls like she was listening to something, like she was waiting for someone, but there was no one there, not that I could see. And one night, when I couldn't take it anymore, I followed her quietly when she went into the living room, and I saw her standing there, staring at the wall, and her mouth was moving, but there were no words, just strange, guttural sounds, and I froze. I didn't know what to do, but I had to know. I had to find out what she was doing, and I stepped closer, just a few feet away, and that's when I saw it, and I almost passed out because there, in the corner of the room, was a shadow that wasn't hers, a shadow that moved, that shifted, like something was standing behind her, something huge, and I backed away slowly. But I must have made a sound because she turned to look at me, and her eyes were black, completely black. No whites, no irises, just endless dark, and she whispered, "They've come for me," and I couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't breathe, and I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't obey, and she took a step toward me, and I swear I could feel the air shift, feel the room get colder, and then she said, "Don't you want to know what's coming for us?" And before I could answer, she grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the wall, and the floor began to shake. The walls started to crack, and I saw it then, the door. The door I had never noticed before, the one hidden behind the bookcase, and when she opened it, I could feel the darkness spill out, feel the weight of it pressing down on me, and I tried to scream, but no sound came out. And as we stepped into the room beyond, I saw the faces from the pictures, faces from the photographs, their eyes all empty, all staring at me. And then I understood. I had never been alone. I had never been in control, and whatever was here, whatever she had brought with her, was not just in the apartment, not just in the walls, but inside me, inside us both. And as the door slammed shut behind us, and the darkness closed in, I realized that there was no escape, not from her, not from what she had brought with her. And I understood then that I had been chosen for something I could never run from, chosen for a fate I could never avoid, because it wasn't just her that was haunted, it was us all. Story 33. I never thought I would find myself in this position, but here I am, in the dark, writing this, hoping that somehow, some way, someone might read this and understand what happened to me, or maybe it'll serve as a warning. If that's even possible, because after everything that's happened, after the last few weeks of my life, I don't even know if I can trust my own mind anymore. But I'll start at the beginning, and I'll tell you everything, even if it doesn't make sense, even if you don't believe me, because I have to get it out of me, I have to say it, I have to warn someone. So it all started about a month ago when I moved into this old house. It wasn't much, just a small cottage on the edge of town. The kind that no one really paid attention to anymore, like it had been forgotten by time itself. And it was cheap, too cheap. But I didn't care. I was desperate to get out of the apartment I'd been renting for years, desperate for a change. So I moved in, unpacked, and settled in as best as I could. But from the moment I stepped through the door, I felt something off, something wrong. But I couldn't put my finger on it, and I ignored it, tried to convince myself it was just nerves, just a change of scenery. But the longer I stayed, the more I realized something wasn't right. The air felt heavier here, like the house itself was weighing on me, like it was watching me. And I tried to brush it off as paranoia, but it wasn't just the feeling of being watched. No, it was something deeper, something in the walls, something that was alive. And at first, it started small creaks in the floorboards when I was the only one home, flickering lights in the middle of the night. And I told myself it was just an old house, that it was bound to have its quirks. But then I started hearing voices at night, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere, soft at first, like a murmur behind my ear. And I'd turn around, expecting to see someone, but there'd be no one there. And after a few nights of this, I began to question my sanity. But I couldn't tell anyone because how could I explain it? I couldn't even explain it to myself. So I kept it to myself, hoping it would stop, hoping it would just be a phase. But it wasn't. It only got worse. And that's when I noticed the mirror. I don't know why it took me so long to see it, but one night, as I was brushing my teeth, I looked into the mirror and there it was, a face that wasn't mine. Not really, not entirely, but it looked familiar, like something I should know, like something I had seen before but couldn't remember. And I stared at it, and the reflection stared back at me, its eyes wide, like it was trying to warn me. And when I blinked, it was gone, and I thought I was losing my mind. But deep down, I knew I wasn't imagining it, not anymore. And I started researching the house, its history, because if I could find out what was wrong with it, maybe I could fix it. Maybe I could make it go away. But what I found only made things worse. This house had a dark history, much darker than I'd ever imagined. It had been built on land that had once belonged to a family who disappeared without a trace. Their house burned to the ground in a fire that was never fully explained. And the more I read, the more I realized that the house wasn't just old, it was cursed. Cursed with something that fed on people, fed on their fear. And when I found that out, I thought I'd leave, but I didn't. I couldn't leave because something in the house was pulling me deeper. It was like it had claimed me. Like I was never meant to leave, like I was stuck here. And that's when the nightmares began. At first, they were just dreams, but they were always the same. Dark figures standing at the foot of my bed, watching me, waiting for me to wake up. And when I did, they were still there, the shadows lingering just at the edge of my vision. And one night, I woke up to find the bedclothes tangled around me, and I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. And the figure was standing in the doorway, just standing there, watching, and I could feel its eyes on me, feel it reaching for me. And that's when I finally screamed, and I ran out of the room. But it followed me, the thing that wasn't human, and it wasn't just in the dark corners anymore. It was right in front of me, and I could see it now, clearly. And it wasn't just one, it was many, hundreds, thousands, all of them, faces, twisted, deformed, with hollow eyes and mouths that never stopped moving. And I could hear them whispering, all of them whispering my name, calling me, begging me to stay. And I ran so fast, out the door, out into the night. But when I looked behind me, I saw it. They were all there, standing in the yard, staring at me, and I couldn't escape, couldn't outrun them. And I tried to scream, but no sound came out. And the last thing I remember was running through the woods. But the more I ran, the farther away the road seemed to get. And the trees began to close in, like they were alive. Like they were pushing me, trapping me. And that's when I saw it. The thing, the creature that had been waiting for me in the woods. It was tall, taller than anything I had ever seen. Its skin stretched tight over its bones, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. And its mouth was too wide to be real. And it smiled at me. And I knew that I had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. And I knew I would never escape the house, the curse, or whatever it was following me, and I don't know how long I've been here, how long I've been trapped in this nightmare, but I can feel it now, the pull, the weight of it, getting closer, and I'm starting to forget what it was like to feel safe, to feel human. And maybe I've already lost myself. Maybe I've already become one of them, one of the things that lurks in the shadows of the house, and all I can do now is write, to tell you, to warn you, because if you're reading this, if you've come this far, it means you've made a mistake, you've crossed the line, and you're already too late, just like me, because there's no escaping it, not now, not once it's found you, and all I can do is wait for them to come for me, and wait for them to come for you. Story 34. I don't tell people about what happened anymore, not because I'm afraid they won't believe me, but because I'm afraid they will, and I know once they do, it'll start to follow them too, the same way it followed me, like it waited for someone to finally acknowledge it. Like it feeds on attention, so I stayed quiet for years, tried to live a life where it didn't exist, but lately it's been creeping back in, and the dreams are worse now, and if I don't get this out of me, I feel like I'll burst. Like something is clawing to get out through my skin. So here it is. This is what happened to me when I was 17, when I worked in the back room of an antique store, a place full of dusty relics and dead people's memories, a place I thought was boring and harmless. But now I know better, because it started when we got this strange wooden cabinet in. Small, dark, ugly really, with carved symbols that didn't look like they came from anywhere I recognized, and the moment it came through the door, something in the air shifted, like a weight had dropped onto the building, and everyone who touched it got quiet, not scared exactly, just uneasy, like the kind of tension you feel before a storm, and I remember the first time I opened it. The hinges groaned like something was resisting, and inside it was just dark, too dark, like no light touched the inside, and when I stuck my hand in, just to feel around, I felt something warm brush my fingers, and I swear it pulled back like it was breathing, and I jumped and slammed it shut and told myself it was just my imagination. But that night I started hearing knocking not from my door, but from inside my closet, slow, steady, and when I opened it, nothing was there, but the knocking kept coming. Every night, louder, closer, and one night I didn't open it. I just waited, and then I heard it, my voice, whispering from inside, calling my name, not quite right, like someone trying to mimic me with a mouth that wasn't made for speech. And when I opened the closet, I saw the cabinet, even though it was still supposed to be at the shop. But it was there, just sitting on the floor of my closet, closed but vibrating, like something was trying to get out. And I tried to scream, but nothing came out. And I shut the door and cried and stayed up all night. And in the morning it was gone, but the knocking never stopped. And I knew then that it wasn't just the cabinet, it was something inside it, something old and hungry and angry. And it had seen me, and the day started to blur. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, and I started seeing things in the corners of mirrors, things that looked like me but weren't, things that moved just a second after I did, smiling when I wasn't, mouthing things I didn't say, and I tried to burn the cabinet. I went back to the shop and poured lighter fluid all over it and set it alight, and I watched it burn, but the flames didn't touch it. They just danced around it like they were afraid, and it sat there, untouched, and I ran, I quit. I told everyone I was sick and I never went back, but it didn't matter, because the cabinet came back, always came back, sometimes just in my dreams, sometimes in the middle of my room, or in the back seat of my car. Just sitting there in silence, waiting, and once I thought I'd gotten rid of it for good, when I moved 3 states away, changed my name, started over, but even then it came back, not right away, but slowly, like it was crawling across the country just to find me, and when I saw it again, sitting in the hallway of my new apartment, I knew it had never left. It had just been waiting for me to feel safe again, and the knocking started up once more, louder now, more urgent. And the voice behind the wood started saying things it shouldn't know, things only I knew. And I realized it wasn't just a voice, it was a part of me now, something that had rooted itself inside my bones. And when I look at my reflection now, I can see its influence, subtle but spreading, like cracks forming across the surface of my mind. And sometimes I lose time, whole hour's gone, and I find dust on my hands, old dust, like from the shop, like from the cabinet, and my fingernails are black underneath. And I think I know what that means. I think it's making me bring it to others now, to show them, to open it in front of them and let them see what I saw, to let it find a new home, a new voice to whisper in. So if this ever reaches you, and you're knocking in the night, or see a cabinet where it shouldn't be, or find yourself smiling in a mirror when you're not, don't open it. No matter what it says, no matter how much it sounds like someone you know, don't let it speak your name, because once it does, it remembers you forever, and there's no going back, no burning it away, no running far enough. There's just you, in the dark, and the door inside you slowly swinging open.